The rain on Halcyon 3 never really washed anything clean. It just rearranged the grime, smearing layers of soot and hydrocarbon residue across the plastic awnings of the lower levels until the entire city felt like it was sweating oil. Jonah Cole adjusted the collar of his synthetic jacket, trying to keep the acidic drizzle from trickling down his neck, but the dampness had already seeped through to his bones. It was 1900 hours, or close enough to it that his internal clock was already screaming for a drink he had promised himself he would not have until after his shift. He trudged down the walkway of Sector 4, a sprawling industrial gut of the megacity where the sunlight never quite reached the pavement. Above him, the upper levels were a lattice of chrome and glass, piercing the smog clouds, home to the people who could afford real air and water that did not taste like recycled pipe rust. Down here, the light came from flickering neon signs advertising noodle stalls, cybernetic repair shops, and holovids that were 3 years out of date. A delivery drone buzzed overhead, one of its rotors whining with a bad bearing, sounding uncomfortably like a distant mortar shell. Jonah flinched. It was a microscopic movement, a tightening of the trapezius muscles and a subtle shift of his weight to the balls of his feet, but it was there. The flinch was a relic. It was a souvenir from the Terran Republic Infantry, 3rd Battalion, specifically from the scorched plains of the Violari border worlds. 10 years had passed since the armistice. 10 years since the guns went cold and the politicians shook hands over the mass graves. But for Jonah, the war was not history. It was a low-frequency hum in the back of his skull, a ghost limb that refused to stop itching. He stepped around a puddle that shimmered with a rainbow of leaked coolant. A street vendor was shouting in a dialect that sounded like a mix of Cantonese and standard Terran trade cant, hawking skewers of meat that were legally required to be labeled as textured protein. Jonah kept his head down. He had perfected the art of being invisible. If you looked at no one looked at you. If you carried yourself with the gray, exhausted slump of every other factory worker and logistic drone operator in the sector, you could drift through the world like smoke. He reached the supermarket, a boxy prefabricated structure with a flickering sign that read Market Fresh in cheerful blue letters, though the F and the R had burned out months ago, leaving it to read Marketesh. It was a grim place, smelling of ozone, stale bread, and the harsh antiseptic cleaner the cleaning bots sprayed liberally but ineffectively over the tiled floors. Jonah badged in at the employee entrance. The scanner chirped a sullen acceptance of his identity. Jonah Cole, ID 49 Alpha, stock clerk, not Sergeant Cole, not Silver Star recipient, just a guy who put boxes on shelves while the rest of the city slept or drank itself into oblivion. Inside, the air was filtered but stale. The fluorescent lights hummed with a headache-inducing frequency. Jonah walked past the break room, where a muted holoscreen was playing a news loop about renewed tensions on the frontier. He ignored it. He avoided the news the same way he avoided loud noises and sudden flashes of light. It did not matter who was angry at whom. It did not matter which admiral was rattling a saber or which ambassador was walking out of a summit. It all ended the same way, with mud, blood, and silence. He clocked in and found his supervisor, a man named Gorski. Gorski was a soft man, built like a sack of grain that had been left out in the rain, with a comb-over that fooled no one and a spirit made of petty malice. "Late again, Cole," Gorski said, not looking up from his datapad. Jonah glanced at the wall clock. It read 1902. "The transit tube was backed up," Jonah said, his voice a gravelly rumble that he rarely used for more than a few sentences at a time. "Excuses are for people who do not want to work," Gorski muttered. "Get to aisle 6. The synth milk shipment came in and the bot stacked it upside down again. Jonah nodded and moved away. He did not hate Gorski. Hating Gorski would require an expenditure of emotional energy that Jonah could not afford. Gorski was just another obstacle, like a locked door or a jammed rifle, to be navigated with minimum fuss. The shift settled into its numbing rhythm. Jonah moved crates of nutrient paste and cartons of synthetic milk with mechanical efficiency. His hands, scarred and rough, handled the heavy pallets with an ease that betrayed a strength maintained not by gym visits, but by a lifetime of carrying things that were too heavy for one man. Around him, the night crew cracked jokes. They were a motley collection of dropouts, students, and people who had just run out of luck. They laughed about the customers, about the terrible pay, about the rumors that the company was going to replace them all with newer model androids. Jonah offered a dry chuckle when required, a deflection that kept him part of the group but distinct from it. "Hey, Jonah," one of the younger kids, a boy named Dax, called out from the next aisle. "You ever see action in the war? I heard you were infantry." Jonah paused, a carton of eggs in his hand. He did not look at Dax. He looked at the expiration date stamped on the carton. "I drove a truck." Jonah lied smoothly. "Logistics. Most exciting thing I saw was a flat tire on a munitions hauler." Dax looked disappointed. "Oh, I bet that was boring." "Boring is good," Jonah said, placing the eggs on the shelf. "Boring keeps you alive." He resumed his work, but his senses were not focused on the milk cartons. Even here, amidst the mundane safety of aisle 6. Jonah scanned. It was involuntary. His eyes tracked the movement of customers near the entrance. He noted the exit routes. He cataloged the heavy objects that could be used as improvised weapons. He watched a man in a trench coat lingering near the liquor section, reading his body language, slumped shoulders, shifting weight, and categorized him as non-threat, likely intoxicated. It was a curse, this vision. He saw the geometry of violence everywhere. He saw kill zones in the cereal aisle. He saw cover positions behind the checkout counters. The hours bled away. The store emptied out as the night deepened, leaving only the desperate and the insomnia-ridden to wander the aisles under the buzzing lights. It was nearly 3 in the morning when the automatic doors hissed open with a sound like a dying snake. Jonah was restocking the bakery section, near the front of the store. He felt the change in air pressure as the doors opened, carrying a gust of cold, wet wind from the street. He looked up. A woman walked in. She was soaked through. A heavy, rough-spun cloak hooded her head and shadowed her face. But even under the shapeless garment, her movements were jarringly graceful. She did not walk like the people of the lower levels, who shambled and stomped. She flowed. She moved with a fluid, liquid tension, like a deer stepping into a clearing where it knows a wolf might be waiting. She clutched a small, battered, insulated pack against her chest, holding it with both hands as if it contained the crown jewels. Or a bomb. Jonah stopped stacking bread. He went still, his breath holding in his chest. He did not know why, but the hairs on the back of his arm stood up. The threat assessment part of his brain spun its wheels. Unknown contact, high tension, potential concealment, but there was no weapon in her hands, just that battered bag. She walked toward the service counter where Gorski was leaning, picking his teeth with a plastic stylus. Jonah moved quietly to the end of the aisle, positioning himself behind a stack of stale sourdough loaves. He told himself he was just working. He told himself he was not spying. The woman approached the counter. She hesitated, her fingers tightening on the bag until her knuckles, pale and slender, turned white. "Excuse me," she said. Her voice was soft, melodic, but laced with a brittle exhaustion. Her Terran was excellent, but the accent was wrong. The vowels were too round, the consonants clipped with a precision that spoke of a throat designed for a different language entirely. Gorski looked up, annoyed at having his toothpicking interrupted. "Yeah? We are closing in 10 minutes. Lady, buy something or get out." The woman did not flinch at his tone. She seemed to expect it. She lowered her head slightly, the hood obscuring her eyes. I do not have credits for the fresh items," she said. "I was wondering if you have any food that is expired, anything that you are going to throw away?" Gorski blinked, then a slow, ugly grin spread across his face. He enjoyed moments like this. He enjoyed being the lord of his tiny, fluorescent kingdom. "Expired?" Gorski repeated loud enough for the cameras to pick up, loud enough to shame her. "You want garbage? We have strict health protocols. Lady, I cannot just give away trash. It is against corporate policy." "Please," the woman whispered. "I have nothing. A loaf of bread that is hard, a fruit that is bruised, anything." Jonah watched from the shadows. He saw the ceiling-mounted security cameras swivel toward her. The facial recognition software would be trying to tag her, to match her biometrics against the citizen database. Then, the strangest thing happened. The LED tally light on the camera closest to her flickered. It turned from a steady recording red to a confused strobe-like yellow, then buzzed and reset. The camera twitched, its servo motors grinding as if it were trying to focus on a ghost. Gorski did not notice. He reached under the counter and pulled out a small, sad-looking fruit pie. The packaging was crinkled, and a spot of green mold was visible on the crust through the plastic window. It had been sitting in the return bin for 2 days. He waved it in her face, dangling it like a treat for a dog. "You want this?" Gorski asked. "Blueberry." Or it was, before it turned into a science experiment. The woman's posture shifted. She leaned forward, a desperate, hungry energy radiating from her. She reached out a hand, but Gorski pulled the pie back, chuckling. "I do not know," Gorski said. "Corporate says I should incinerate it. Rules are rules." The woman looked up, for the first time. The harsh overhead lights caught her face beneath the hood. Jonah froze. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, with a quality that made it seem to catch the light and hold it. But it was her eyes that stopped his heart. They were large, set wide apart, and they did not have whites. They were pools of deep, swirling violet, and as her emotion peaked, they flickered with a subtle, internal bioluminescence. It was a faint pulse of light, like a heartbeat made of photons. She was Vailari, the enemy. The monsters who had burned the colony on Jericho Prime, the shapers of the void. Jonah's hand instinctively went to his belt, reaching for a sidearm that had not been there for 10 years. His breath hissed through his teeth. Contact. Front. But then she spoke again. She did not sound like a monster. She did not sound like the terrifying comms chatter that had haunted his nightmares. "Please," she begged, her voice trembling, stripped of all pride. "Got any expired pie for my daughter?" Her voice cracked on the word daughter. It was a fracture in the air, a sound so raw and painfully human that it shattered the invisible wall of prejudice Jonah had built around himself. "Daughter?" Gorski laughed. It was a cruel, wet sound, begging for moldy pie. He sneered. "That is pathetic. Even for a... That is enough." The voice was low, flat, and carried the weight of absolute command. Gorski jumped, nearly dropping the pie. He spun around to see Jonah stepping out from behind the bread aisle. Jonah did not look like a stock clerk in that moment. He stood with his shoulders squared, his chin tucked, his eyes hard and dead as gunmetal. Coal? Gorski stammered, his face flushing red. Get back to work. I am handling a loiterer. Jonah ignored him. He walked to the counter, his heavy boots thudding rhythmically on the tile. He moved into Gorski's personal space, looming over the shorter man. Ring it up, Jonah said. What? Ring up a fresh one, and a quart of milk, and a pack of protein bars. The good ones, not the sawdust blocks. Gorski gaped at him. Are you crazy? You're going to pay for this trash to eat like a queen? I said ring it up, Jonah said softly. Or I will demonstrate exactly how the bots stack the milk upside down using your head. Gorski swallowed hard. He had never seen coal like this. The quiet, lumbering worker had vanished, replaced by something dangerous. He muttered a curse, punched a few keys on the register, and shoved a fresh pie and the other items across the counter. 5 credits. Gorski spat. That is coming out of your check. Coal. Take 10, Jonah said. Keep the change for a personality transplant. He picked up the food. He turned to the woman. She had taken a step back, her luminous eyes wide with shock and terror. She looked at Jonah's face, then at the food, then back at his face. She was waiting for the trick. She was waiting for the cruelty that usually followed kindness in this city. Jonah held out the items. Take it, he said. His voice was gruff but not unkind. It is fresh. Do not feed the kid mold. The woman hesitated. Her hand trembled as she reached out. Her fingers brushed against his as she took the pie. Jonah felt a jolt. It was not static electricity. It was a warmth, a low-frequency hum that traveled from her skin to his, vibrating up his arm and settling in his chest. It was a sensation he remembered from the war, the feeling of Vailari tech or biology. He was never sure which. It was the feeling of the enemy, but her skin was soft, and she was shaking. Thank you, she whispered, clutching the food to her chest as if it were gold. Jonah nodded once, curtly. Go, before he changes his mind. She turned and fled toward the automatic doors, her cloak swirling around her. Jonah watched her go. He felt Gorski's glare burning into his back, but he did not care. His heart was hammering against his ribs, a frantic, confused rhythm. He had just aided and abetted a Vailari. He had just bought dinner for the species that had killed his entire platoon. He grabbed his jacket from the hook behind the counter. Where are you going? Gorski shouted. Shift is not over. I am taking my break, Jonah said, pushing past him. He walked out into the rain. The alleyway beside the supermarket was dark, illuminated only by the sporadic flashes of lightning that lit up the smog clouds above. The rain was falling harder now, a relentless, drumming sheet of water. Jonah scanned the darkness. He saw a figure huddled under the overhang of a ventilation unit a few meters away. She was trying to shove the food into her insulated pack, struggling with the zipper. He walked over. He popped the release on his umbrella, a sturdy military surplus thing, and held it over her. The sudden cessation of rain hitting her hood made her jump. She spun around, her back hitting the brick wall, her eyes flashing that violet light again. Easy, Jonah said, holding his hands up, palms open. Just me. She stared at him, her chest heaving. The hood had slipped back further now. He could see the delicate, glowing markings that ran along her neck and up to her temples. They were intricate, geometric patterns of bioluminescence, pulsing softly in time with her heartbeat. Vailari markings, sigils of the Void-born. His training screamed at him. Target, enemy, kill or capture. He looked at her face. He saw the fear. He saw the dark circles under her eyes. He saw a mother who was terrified she would not make it back to her child. You are Vailari, Jonah said. It was not a question. She stiffened, bracing herself for the blow. Yes, you should not be here. People in this sector, they do not take kindly to your kind, not after the war. I know, she said, her voice bitter. I know what your people think of us. Jonah looked at the pie she was clutching. You said you had a daughter. Her expression softened, the hard lines of fear melting into something desperate and tender. Myron, she whispered. She is very hungry. She will think this is a feast. That sentence cut through the last of Jonah's prejudice like a monomolecular blade. She will think this is a feast. He looked at the woman, Lyra, though he did not know her name yet, and he did not see the enemy. He saw a civilian. He saw a casualty. Cover your markings, Jonah said gruffly. Pull the hood down. If the patrols see those lights, you will be in a detention cell before you can blink. She looked surprised, then hurriedly adjusted her cloak, pulling the fabric low over her forehead. Why did you help me? She asked, studying his face. You are a soldier. I can tell. The way you stand, the way you look at the exits. Jonah looked away, staring out at the rain-slicked street. I was a soldier, he corrected. Now I am just a guy who stocks shelves. Go home to your kid. She hesitated, then nodded. Thank you. Again. She turned and walked quickly away, heading toward the deeper shadows of the labyrinthine alleyways that cut through the residential block. Jonah watched her go. He should turn around. He should go back inside, finish his shift, go home, drink his synth whiskey, and stare at the wall until he passed out. That was the routine. That was the safe life. But then he saw them. Two men detached themselves from the darkness of a recessed doorway across the street. They were big, wearing heavy leather dusters and combat boots. They moved with a predatory, stalking gait. One of them tapped a comms unit on his wrist and spoke into it, his eyes fixed on the retreating form of the woman. Jonah's eyes narrowed. He recognized the type. Bounty hunters, or slavers, or just low-level scum looking for a victim who could not go to the police. They were tailing her. Jonah swore under his breath, a long, inventive string of profanity that covered the anatomy of several different species. Not my problem, he muttered to the rain. He took a step toward the store. He stopped. He saw the way she had held that pie. He heard the crack in her voice. Damn it. Jonah turned and followed the men. He kept his distance, moving silently through the debris-cluttered alley. He used the noise of the rain and the hum of the ventilation fans to mask his footsteps. He was rusty, but the instincts were still there. Keep to the shadows. Watch the sightlines. The men picked up the pace as the woman turned a corner into a dead-end service lane behind an old fusion plant. It was a classic trap. She had taken a wrong turn, or she was trying to find a shortcut that didn't exist. Jonah rounded the corner just in time to see the men close in. Well, look at this, one of the men said. His voice was a rasp, like sandpaper on concrete, a little stray bird, far from the nest. Lyra backed up until she hit a rusted dumpster. She held the bag behind her, shielding it with her body. Stay back, she warned. Her voice was steady, but Jonah could hear the underlying tremor. Or what? The second man sneered. You gonna glow at us? We know what you are, darling. We know what a Vailari female goes for on the black market, especially the eyes. People pay a lot for those pretty eyes. Jonah stepped into the alley entrance. He did not shout. He did not announce himself. He just let out a heavy, theatrical sigh. You know, Jonah said, his voice echoing slightly in the narrow space. You guys are a cliché. Dark alley, helpless woman, threatening dialogue. It is just lazy writing. The two men spun around. Who the hell are you? The first man growled, pulling a serrated combat knife from his belt. I am the guy who is annoyed that his break is being interrupted, Jonah said. He walked forward, his hands loose at his sides. Walk away, old man, the knife wielder warned. This does not concern you. See, that is where you are wrong, Jonah said, closing the distance. I just bought that pie, and I would hate to see it get squashed. The man with the knife lunged. It was a clumsy, telegraphed strike, aiming for the gut. Jonah did not block it. He stepped inside the arc of the swing. His left hand snapped out, catching the man's wrist and twisting it with a sickening crunch of bone and cartilage. The knife clattered to the wet pavement. In the same motion, Jonah drove his right elbow into the man's throat. It was a controlled strike, enough to collapse the windpipe momentarily, not enough to kill. The man gagged and dropped to his knees, clutching his neck. The second man hesitated, his hand reaching for a pistol at his hip. Jonah looked at him. He did not assume a fighting stance. He just looked at him with eyes that had seen orbital bombardments and trench warfare. You can pull that, Jonah said calmly. But I promise you, I will feed it to you before you disengage the safety. The man froze. He looked at his partner gasping on the ground, then at Jonah's face. He did the math. He turned and ran, sprinting back down the alleyway. Jonah nudged the gasping man with his boot. Stay down. Rethink your life choices. He turned to Lyra. She was pressed against the dumpster, her eyes wide, staring at him with a mixture of awe and terror. She had seen violence before. You did not survive a war without seeing it. But the brutal efficiency of what Jonah had just done was something else. Are you hurt? Jonah asked. She shook her head. Mute. We need to move, Jonah said. The one who ran will call friends, or the cops. And you do not want to explain your biometrics to the cops, as if on cue. The distant wail of a police drone siren cut through the air. Blue and red lights began to strobe off the wet brick walls at the end of the alley. Jonah grabbed her arm, not roughly but firmly. Come on. He dragged her away from the main street, toward a rusted maintenance hatch set into the wall of the fusion plant. He jammed his fingers into the release mechanism, fighting the corrosion, until it popped open with a groan. Inside, Jonah urged. She scrambled through the hatch. Jonah followed, pulling the heavy steel door shut behind them just as the hum of drone rotors swept over the alley entrance. They were in a narrow utility tunnel, lined with steaming pipes and thick bundles of cables. It was dark, lit only by the faint emergency strips on the floor. The space was cramped. They were pressed together, chest to chest, breathing hard. Jonah could feel the heat radiating from her. He could smell the rain on her cloak and a faint, spicy scent that was distinctly alien, like cinnamon and ozone. He was acutely aware of her body against his, the softness beneath the rough fabric, the rapid flutter of her pulse. They froze, listening. Outside, the drone hovered, its scanner beam sweeping the alley. Then, after a tense minute, it moved on. Jonah let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. Lyra looked up at him. In the gloom, her eyes were two burning coals of violet light. They were inches apart. He could see the flecks of gold in her irises. He could feel the electric hum of her skin against his hand where he still held her arm. For a second, the war, the supermarket, the grime of the city fell away. There was just the sudden, overwhelming intimacy of shared danger. A spark jumped between them, not a glitch this time, but a pull, a gravity. She pulled her arm back, breaking the contact. You are very good at hurting people, she said quietly. Jonah stepped back, giving her space. The spell broke. The soldier returned. "It is a skill set," he said flatly. "Like stacking shelves. Just pays worse." He leaned against the tunnel wall, rubbing his face with a hand that was shaking slightly. The adrenaline was fading, leaving the old familiar ache in his joints. "Go down this tunnel," he said, pointing into the dark. "About 500 meters. It comes out near the old transit station in Sector 5. No cameras down there. You can lose yourself." Lyra adjusted her pack. She looked at him, her expression unreadable now. Wary again. "Why?" she asked. "Why did you do this? You could have walked away." Jonah looked at the ceiling pipes. "I do not know," he admitted. "Maybe I just like pie." She studied him for a moment longer. Then, surprisingly, a ghost of a smile touched her lips. It was a sad, fleeting thing, but it transformed her face. "Thank you." "Jonah Cole," she said. She knew his name. He must have been wearing his name tag. She turned and slipped into the shadows of the tunnel, moving with that silent, flowing grace. "Wait," Jonah called out. She paused, looking back. "The pie," Jonah said awkwardly. "Do not squash it." She nodded, her hand resting protectively on the bag. "My daughter will not mind," she said softly. Then she was gone, disappearing into the maze of the lower city. Jonah stood alone in the tunnel for a long time. He listened to the drip of condensation and the hum of the power conduits. He eventually climbed back out, finished his shift in a daze, and walked back to his tiny one-room apartment in a tenement block that smelled of boiled cabbage and despair. He lay on his narrow cot, staring at the water stains on the ceiling. He tried to summon his usual numbness. He tried to push the memories of the war back into their box, but tonight, the box would not close. He kept seeing the alley, the rain, the violence, and he kept seeing those eyes, violet and gold, glowing in the dark. "Got any expired pie for my daughter?" The words echoed in the empty room. Jonah closed his eyes, but the image of her face remained burned on his retinas. For the first time in 10 years, he wasn't thinking about the people he had killed. He was thinking about the one person he had helped, and he had a sinking, terrifying feeling that he was not done helping her. 3 days of rain had turned the lower levels of Halcyon 3 into a slick, shivering gray world, but Jonah Cole barely felt the dampness. The numbness that had been his armor for 10 years had developed a hairline fracture. He walked his usual route to the supermarket, head down, hands jammed into the pockets of his synthetic jacket. But his eyes were restless. He found himself scanning the faces of the huddled masses in the transit queues. He checked the shadows of alleyways where the steam vents hissed. He looked for a flash of violet light, a glimpse of a rough-spun cloak, a posture that held too much grace for the gutter. He was looking for her. The realization irritated him. He kicked a crushed aluminum can into a puddle. He told himself it was just professional curiosity. You do not see a tiger in a petting zoo and then just forget about it. She was an anomaly, a variable he had not accounted for. But when he reached the spot near the fusion plant where he had fought the 2 thugs, he lingered. He stared at the rusted dumpster where she had cowered. The rain had washed away the blood, but the memory of her voice cracking on the word daughter was still etched into the brickwork. Jonah ground his teeth and turned away. He had a shift to work. The atmosphere at Market Fresh had curdled. The air conditioning was humming too loudly. And there were new faces near the entrance, men in stiff black tactical vests with the logo of a private security firm. Aegis Corp, stenciled in white across their chests. They were installing a new archway just inside the automatic doors. It was a bulky, menacing piece of hardware, bristling with sensors and emitters. Bioscanners, Gorski announced with gleeful importance as Jonah clocked in. Corporate sent them down this morning, top of the line. Jonah looked at the machine. It looked like a guillotine designed by a computer. What for? Jonah asked, keeping his voice flat. We worried about people stealing synth milk? Gorski snorted. It is not about theft. Cole. It is about purity. Management says there has been an influx of non-compliant xenotypes in the sector. Illegals. Refugees. The scanners will pick up non-Terran DNA markers at the door. If it beeps, they do not get in. Simple as that. Jonah felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. He looked at the scanner, thinking of the woman, Lyra, and the faint bioluminescent pulse of her skin. This machine would not just beep for her, it would scream. In the break room, the holovid was blaring louder than usual. A news anchor with perfect teeth and dead eyes was reading a report about a skirmish on the Rim worlds. Vailari remnants have reportedly attacked a Terran supply convoy near the Antares belt, the anchor said, her voice smooth and alarming. Casualties are estimated in the thousands. The Senate has authorized increased security measures for all core systems. Citizens are reminded to report any suspicious activity or unregistered alien presence. A few of the day shift workers were nodding along, muttering about how it was about time the government cracked down. Jonah poured himself a cup of bitter black coffee and stared into the dark liquid. The rhetoric was familiar. It was the same angry, fearful noise that had played before the war started. Them against us. The monsters in the dark. Protect your own. Jonah drank the coffee. It tasted like ash. 2 nights later, the city felt tighter, like a fist beginning to close. Jonah was off shift. He should have been in his apartment, unconscious. Instead, he was wandering the perimeter of Sector 5, an area known as the Sunken Yards. It was a graveyard of old infrastructure, where the supports of the megacity dug deep into the bedrock, creating cavernous spaces that the sunlight never touched. He found the market by accident. He heard the murmur of voices echoing up from a defunct subway entrance. He followed the sound down a broken escalator, past graffiti-covered tiles, until the air opened up into a vast, subterranean train station. It was a hidden world. Lanterns strung on wires cast a warm, flickering glow over hundreds of makeshift stalls. The air smelled of frying oil, exotic spices, and ozone. It was a black market, a refuge for the people who did not have the right ID chips to shop upstairs. Jonah moved through the crowd. He saw species here that he had not seen since his deployment days. Hulking reptilian dockworkers, insectoid scavengers, and humans who looked too rough for the sanitized zones. He saw her near the edge of the platform, where the old tracks vanished into the dark. Lyra was standing behind a small folding table. She had pushed her hood back slightly, though the shadows of the station kept her face obscured from casual view. On the table, arranged on a piece of black velvet, were small pieces of jewelry. They were made of twisted scrap metal and glass, but they pulsed with a faint rhythmic light, powered by tiny slivers of bioluminescent moss or tech Jonah did not recognize. Standing next to her was a child, Mirren. The girl was small, maybe 6 or 7 years old. She was wrapped in layers of oversized clothing. A thick wool scarf wound multiple times around her neck and face, leaving only her eyes visible. Her eyes were huge, the same violet as her mother's, but bright with childish wonder. She was staring at a nearby stall where a vendor was spinning clouds of pink sugar onto sticks. Her hands were gripping the edge of Lyra's table, her gaze fixed on the candy with a hunger that was naked and heartbreaking. Jonah watched from behind a concrete pillar. He saw Lyra gently touch the girl's shoulder. He saw her adjust the scarf, pulling it higher to ensure the glowing markings on the child's neck were completely hidden. The gesture was so tender, so protective, that Jonah felt a physical ache in his chest. He took a breath. He adjusted his jacket. He stepped out of the shadows. He approached the table slowly, making sure Lyra saw him coming. She tensed immediately, her hand dropping below the table, likely reaching for a knife. Her eyes locked onto him, widening as she recognized his face. "Relax," Jonah said, raising a hand. "I am not looking for a fight." Lyra let out a sharp breath, her shoulders dropping an inch. "The pie man," she whispered. Jonah winced. "Is that what you are calling me?" "It is better than what I call most humans," she said. Her voice was guarded, but there was a flicker of relief in it. "What are you doing here?" "Jonah Cole?" "Shopping." Jonah lied. He looked down at the table. "These are interesting, so they are junk," Lyra said honestly. "Bits of wire and lumina moss, but they are pretty, and people like pretty things." Jonah looked at Myron. The girl had torn her eyes away from the candy and was staring up at him. She looked at his scar, at his rough hands, at the grim set of his jaw. She did not look scared. She looked curious. "Hello," Jonah said to the girl. Myron blinked. "You are the one who gave Mama the food, the feast." Jonah felt his face heat up. It was not a feast, kid. It was just groceries. Myron giggled, a shy, bubbling sound that seemed too pure for this dank, underground station. "You are big," Myron observed. "Myron, hush," Lyra scolded gently. Jonah smiled. It was a rusty expression, one he had not used in a long time. "I am average," Jonah said. "Everyone else is just small." He reached into his pocket. He pulled out a handful of credits, physical chits, not digital transfers. He looked at the vendor with the pink sugar. "Stay here," Jonah ordered. He walked over to the food stall. He bought 2 of the sugar clouds. Then he saw something else hanging from the vendor's awning. It was a cheap plastic toy, a gyroscope with LEDs inside that spun and lit up when you pulled a cord. It cost 5 credits. It was a piece of junk. Jonah bought it. He walked back. He handed one of the sugar sticks to Lyra, who looked at it as if it were a grenade. He handed the other to Myron. The girl's eyes went wide. She looked at her mother for permission. Lyra hesitated, then nodded. Myron grabbed the stick. She took a massive bite, getting pink sugar all over her nose. She closed her eyes and hummed with pure bliss. Jonah held out the toy. "For you," he said. Myron took the gyroscope. Jonah showed her how to pull the cord. The top spun, creating a blurring sphere of red and blue light. Myron gasped. She laughed aloud, a sound of unadulterated joy. She spun it again, dancing in a little circle on the dusty concrete, watching the lights streak through the gloom. Lyra watched her daughter. Then she looked at Jonah. Her violet eyes were shimmering. Not with bioluminescence this time, but with tears she was fighting back. "You did not have to do that," she said softly. "We cannot pay you back." "I had extra credits," Jonah said, shrugging. "And I hate pink sugar. It rots your teeth." Lyra looked at the sweet in her hand, then took a tentative bite. A faint smile touched her lips. "It is disgusting," she agreed. "It tastes like chemicals and happiness." They stood there for a while, an odd trio in the middle of the bustle. Jonah found himself relaxing, the tension of the last few days. The paranoia of the scanner-filled supermarket seemed to recede. He listened to Lyra explain the properties of the moss she used in her jewelry. He told a sanitized story about his time working in a shipyard, making Myron laugh with an impression of a grumpy foreman. It felt normal. It felt domestic. It felt like a life he had never allowed himself to imagine. Then the sirens started. They did not wail like police cars. They screamed. It was a mechanical, grinding shrieking that cut through the noise of the market like a physical blow. Floodlights from the ceiling, which had been dark a moment ago, slammed on with blinding intensity. "Attention!" A voice boomed from the PA system, distorted and deafening. "This is a sanctioned raid by city enforcement. Remain where you are. Prepare for identification scanning." Panic exploded. The market dissolved into chaos. Vendors flipped their tables to create barriers. People screamed and ran in every direction. From the escalator shafts, drones poured in like a swarm of angry hornets. Black, sleek machines with red sensor eyes and stunning prods hanging from their undercarriages. Behind the drones came the heavy infantry. Armored enforcement officers in riot gear, shields up, batons crackling with electricity. "Move!" Jonah barked. The soldier was back. The softness was gone instantly, replaced by a cold, calculating combat processor. He grabbed Lyra's arm. She was frozen, staring at the drones with terrifying recognition. Myron was clutching the spinning toy, her eyes wide with fear. "Lyra!" Jonah shouted over the din. "We have to go!" A drone swooped low over their table. Its scanner beam swept across them. It hit Myron. "Alert!" The drone chirped mechanically. "Unregistered xenotype detected. Level 4 contraband." It leveled a stun cannon at the girl. Jonah did not think. He moved. He snatched a heavy metal canister of fuel from a neighboring stall and hurled it. His aim was true. The canister smashed into the drone's rotor assembly. The machine sparked, wobbled, and crashed into the concrete platform with a crunch of plastic and glass. "Run!" Jonah roared. He scooped Myron up with one arm, holding her against his chest. He grabbed Lyra's hand with the other. He pulled her away from the platform, away from the main exits where the police were bottlenecking the crowd. "Where are we going?" Lyra screamed, stumbling over fallen crates. "The emergency bulkhead!" Jonah yelled back. He led them toward the back of the station, weaving through the panicking mob. A riot officer lunged at them, swinging a shock baton. Jonah didn't stop. He checked the man with his shoulder, using his momentum and mass to send the armored officer sprawling into a pile of scrap metal. They reached a heavy, rust-streaked door marked, "Authorized personnel only." Jonah kicked the locking mechanism. It held. He kicked it again, putting every ounce of his frustration and fear into the blow. The lock shattered. He shoved the door open and pushed Lyra and Marin through. He followed, slamming the heavy steel barrier shut and spinning the manual wheel to lock it just as a spray of stun bolts sparked against the metal. Silence fell, heavy and sudden. They were in a service corridor. The air was cool and smelled of damp earth. The roar of the raid was muffled by inches of steel and concrete. Jonah leaned against the door, gasping for air. His heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs. Myron was trembling in his arms. He set her down gently. She immediately buried her face in Lyra's cloak, sobbing quietly. Lyra was staring at him. She was breathing hard, her chest heaving, but her gaze was fixed on his face with a new, sharp intensity. "You took out a drone with a fuel can," she said, breathless. "You checked an armored enforcer like he was made of cardboard." "Adrenaline," Jonah rasped, rubbing his shoulder. "No," Lyra said. She shook her head slowly. "That was not adrenaline. That was training. That was muscle memory." She took a step back, pulling Myron with her. Her eyes narrowed. "You are not logistics, Jonah Cole. You are not a truck driver. You move like a reaper." Jonah straightened up. He looked at her. There was no point in lying now. The way he had reacted, the threat assessment, the violence, the tactical retreat, it was written all over him. I was infantry, Jonah said quietly. 3rd Battalion, Jericho Prime. Lyra flinched as if he had slapped her. Jericho Prime, the site of the bloodiest campaign of the war, the place where the Vailari lines had broken. You fought us, she whispered. You killed my people. I fought soldiers, Jonah said, his voice hardening. I survived. That is all. He turned and looked down the dark tunnel. We cannot stay here. They will cut through that door eventually. We need to go deeper. He started walking. For a moment, he thought she would not follow. He thought she would take her chances with the police rather than follow a man who had slaughtered her kin, but then he heard the soft shuffle of her boots behind him. They walked for an hour, descending into the bowels of the city. The tunnels here were ancient, part of the original colony infrastructure. The walls were slick with condensation. They finally stopped in a disused control room. It was a small, boxy space filled with dead monitors and dusty consoles. There was only one door, which Jonah barricaded with a heavy metal locker. Safest place we are going to find, Jonah said. He sat down on a crate, wiping sweat from his forehead. Mirren had fallen asleep in Lyra's arms, exhausted by the terror. Lyra laid the girl down on a pile of old tarps, covering her with her own cloak. She stood up and turned to Jonah. In the dim light of the emergency strip on the wall, her bioluminescence seemed brighter, fueled by her agitation. Tell me the truth, she demanded. Her voice was low, but it held that same imperious weight he had heard in the supermarket. Who are you really? I told you, Jonah said wearily. I am nobody. Nobodies do not fight like that, Lyra snapped. Nobodies do not look at a riot squad and see a tactical puzzle. Jonah looked at his hands. They were shaking again. I was a sergeant, he admitted, specialized in urban warfare. I spent 3 years clearing sectors on the border worlds. I saw things. He stopped. He could not say it. He could not describe the smell of burning ozone and flesh. He could not describe the way the Vailari soldiers would sing before they died, a haunting, harmonic sound that still woke him up at night. I did my job, Jonah said hollowly. And then the war ended, and I came here to forget it. Lyra stared at him. She looked at the scar on his chin. She looked at the weary slope of his shoulders. Then she did something unexpected. She reached up and pulled the scarf from her neck. She unclasped her heavy cloak and let it fall to the floor. Underneath, she was wearing a tunic of tattered, stained silk. But the fabric, though ruined, was woven with threads of real silver, and on her collarbone, the glowing markings were not just random patterns. They were a crest, a stylized sunburst intersected by 3 voids. Jonah froze. He knew that crest. He had seen it on propaganda posters. He had seen it on the target lists in the briefing rooms. You recognize it, do not you? Lyra asked. Jonah stood up slowly. The Royal House of Vail, he whispered. Lyra lifted her chin. Even in the dirt and the dark, she looked regal. I am Lyra Vail-Saris, she said, daughter of the High Matriarch, second in line to the Void Throne. Jonah felt the room spin. The woman he had bought expired pie for, the woman who was hiding in a sewer. You are the Peace Bride, Jonah said, the memory surfacing. You were the one they were going to marry to the Terran ambassador, the symbol of the new alliance. I was, Lyra said bitterly, until the treaty was broken, until my uncle seized the throne and declared me a traitor, until the Terran Intelligence Service put a bounty on my head so high that half the galaxy is hunting me. She stepped closer to him. I am a princess. Jonah, and I was begging a supermarket manager for garbage to feed my child. The words hung in the air. Jonah looked at her. He remembered the posters, Lyra in ceremonial robes, beautiful and distant, the hope of two civilizations. And he looked at her now, thin, exhausted, terrified, wearing rags. The humiliation of it hit him like a physical blow. It was not just that she was poor. It was that she had been brought so low. The universe had taken someone who was supposed to be a queen and turned her into a fugitive begging for moldy crusts. And he, a soldier of the Republic, had watched it happen. "Why tell me?" Jonah asked, his voice rough. "I could turn you in. The reward alone." Lyra looked at Myron sleeping on the floor. "Because you bought her a toy," she said simply. "Because you held an umbrella for me. Because when the drones came, you did not run away. You ran toward us." She looked back at him, her violet eyes searching his face. "I am tired of running. Jonah, I am tired of hiding. And I think you are tired too." Jonah sat back down on the crate. He put his head in his hands. "You have no idea," he muttered. The silence that followed was different. It was not tense. It was heavy with shared burden. Hours passed. The city above them rumbled, distant vibrations shaking dust from the ceiling. Lyra sat on the floor next to Jonah's crate. She hugged her knees to her chest. "It is degrading," she whispered into the dark. Jonah looked down at her. "What is?" "Begging," she said. "Seeing the way they look at you. Like you are dirt. Like you are a disease. I was raised to believe I was sacred, that my blood was the life of the stars. And now I would crawl through filth if it meant Myron could eat." She looked up at him, tears shimmering in her eyes. "Does that make me weak?" she asked. Jonah slid off the crate. He sat on the floor beside her. He leaned his back against the cold metal of the console. "No," Jonah said firmly. "That makes you a mother. That is the strongest thing there is." He hesitated, then continued. "I survived the war, Lyra, but I did not live. I have been a ghost for 10 years. I stack shelves, I drink until I cannot think. I watch holovids about people I do not care about. I have no purpose. I have no one." He looked at his hands. "You kept her alive. You fought for her every day. You are stronger than I ever was." Lyra turned her body toward him. She reached out and took his hand. Her skin was warm, humming with that alien energy. "You are not a ghost, Jonah," she said softly. "Ghosts do not buy spinning lights for little girls." She squeezed his hand. Jonah looked at her. In the dim light, the bioluminescent markings on her face cast a soft, ethereal glow on her features. She was beautiful, not in the way the posters were beautiful, but in a way that was raw and real and painful. He felt a pull, a magnetic force that had nothing to do with gravity. His thumb brushed against the back of her hand. Lyra leaned in. She rested her forehead against his shoulder. He could feel the heat of her, the life of her. "Jonah." She breathed. He turned his head. Their faces were inches apart. He should not do this. She was a princess. She was Vailari. She was the enemy. She was a fugitive. This was dangerous. This was insane. But he was starving. He had been starving for 10 years. Not for food, but for this. For connection. For someone to see him not as a weapon or a worker drone, but as a man. Lyra tilted her head up. Her eyes fluttered shut. Her lips parted slightly. Jonah leaned forward. Their lips met. It was tentative at first. A question. "Is this okay?" Then Lyra made a small sound in her throat, a whimper of need, and pressed closer. The kiss deepened. It broke open. It became desperate. It tasted of salt and sugar and fear. It was the collision of two people who had been hollowed out by the universe and were trying to fill the empty spaces with each other. Jonah's hand came up to cup her face, his thumb tracing the glowing line of her cheekbone. Lyra's fingers tangled in his jacket, pulling him tighter, anchoring herself to him. It was intense. It crossed every line, human and alien, soldier and target, grunt and royalty. For a moment, in that dark, dusty room, there was no war. There was no politics. There was just the heat of their bodies and the frantic, clumsy rhythm of their breathing. They pulled apart slowly, gasping for air. Jonah stared at her, his heart racing so fast he thought it might explode. Lyra's lips were swollen, her eyes wide and dark and terrified. They both realized what had just happened. They both realized the precipice they were standing on. "This changes everything," Lyra whispered, her voice shaking. Jonah nodded. He reached out and tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear. His hand lingered for a second, savoring the warmth, before he pulled it back. "Yeah," Jonah rasped. "It does." He looked at the barricaded door. He looked at Myron sleeping. He looked at the Princess of the Void sitting on the floor of a sewer in his jacket. "We are in trouble," Jonah said. Lyra looked at him, and for the first time, her smile reached her eyes. "We are," she agreed, but she did not move away. She stayed close, her shoulder pressed against his, as the darkness of the tunnels pressed in around them. They were in trouble, but at least they were in it together. The single overhead light in the control room flickered, buzzing like a trapped insect. Jonah woke with a stiff neck and a hand instinctively reaching for a weapon he did not have. The silence of the maintenance tunnels had changed. It was no longer the quiet of abandonment. It was the heavy, expectant silence of a trap waiting to snap shut. He sat up, rubbing the grit from his eyes. Lyra was already awake. She stood by the barricaded door, pressing her ear against the cold metal. Mirren was still asleep on the pile of tarps, her thumb tucked into her mouth, looking impossibly small against the backdrop of rusted industrial machinery. "We have a problem," Lyra said without turning around. Her voice was tight. Jonah stood and walked over to the console he had tried to access the night before. The screen, previously dead, was flashing a dull, rhythmic red. Sector offline. Maintenance cycle suspended. Security sweep in progress. "They know we are here," Jonah said, reading the scrolling text. "Or at least, they know someone is here. The city systems logged this room as occupied." Lyra turned to him, in the harsh morning light filtering through a crack in the ventilation shaft. She looked exhausted. The bioluminescent markings on her neck were dim, pulsing with a slow, anxious beat. "It is the bounty," she said. "It went active on the local subnet an hour ago, dead or alive, Jonah. They do not care which." Jonah frowned. "That does not make sense. If you are a political prisoner, you are worth more alive, unless they just want you gone." Lyra glanced at Mirren. Her expression shifted from fear to a fierce, terrifying protectiveness. "It is not just about me," she said softly. "It is Myron." Jonah looked at the sleeping girl. "What about her?" Lyra took a breath, steeling herself. "Mirren is not just my daughter. She is a hybrid. Her father was... He was a Terran xenobiologist. It was a secret union. But that is not why they want her." She walked over to the child and gently adjusted the blanket. "The Vailari built the stargates thousands of years ago," Lyra continued. "The technology is locked to our genetic resonance, but the gates are unstable. They drift. They collapse. My people have been trying to stabilize them for centuries. Myron carries a genetic marker, a perfect fusion of Terran resilience and Violari sensitivity. She is a living key. Jonah. She can interface with the gate architecture in a way no pureblood can. Jonah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the damp room. He looked at the little girl, who was currently drooling slightly on a dirty tarp. "You mean she can open them?" Jonah asked. "She can stabilize them," Lyra corrected. "Or she can shatter them. Whoever controls her controls the travel routes. They could cut off the Terran core worlds from the colonies. They could strand entire fleets in the void. They could rewrite the map of the galaxy." Jonah leaned back against the console, processing the scale of it. This was not just a fugitive run. This was not just a political coup. This was about the jugular vein of civilization. The scanners at the supermarket, Jonah realized aloud. The new security protocols. It was never about petty crime. They were hunting for her genetic signature. Lyra nodded. "I was trying to get her off-world. My mother had an ally, a broker in the belt who smuggles refugees. I was supposed to meet a contact here in the lower city, but the channel went dead 2 days ago. I think they got to him." She looked at Jonah, her eyes pleading. "I do not know who to trust. My uncle has spies everywhere. The Terran government is compromised. If we stay here, they will find us." Jonah looked at Myron, then at Lyra. He felt the weight of the situation pressing down on his shoulders, familiar and heavy. It was the weight of a mission. "We cannot stay in the lower city," Jonah said, his voice dropping into the command tone he had not used since the war. "We need to get off the planet. And we cannot do that without clean IDs and a ship that will not flag on the orbital sensors." He checked the charge on the stun baton he had taken from the enforcement officer the night before. "I know a guy," Jonah said. "He is not a patriot. He is not a hero. But he hates the government. And he likes money." They moved through the underbelly of Halcyon 3 like ghosts. Jonah led them away from the main transit corridors, sticking to the service causeways and the narrow, steaming alleys where the surveillance drones rarely patrolled. The city was waking up, but down here, it always felt like twilight. They passed cybernetics chop shops where back-alley surgeons installed third-hand optics into twitching junkies. They passed improvised shrines built into the alcoves of the sewer walls, piles of circuit boards, wilting synthetic flowers, and faded holographs of soldiers who never came home. Jonah touched the wall briefly as they passed one, a silent acknowledgement of the ghosts that walked beside him. Despite the danger, or perhaps because of it, a strange, grim humor began to weave itself into their journey. Myron, fully awake now and clutching the spinning toy Jonah had bought her, seemed to view the squalor as an adventure. She pointed at a street vendor selling roasted lizards on sticks. "Is that expired pie too?" she asked, her voice piping loud and clear over the street noise. Jonah snorted. "Worse," he said. "That is fresh lizard. Stick to the pie, kid." Lyra pulled Myron close, hiding a smile behind her hand. "Do not listen to him. Myron. He has terrible taste. I saw his boots. They are a fashion crime in 3 systems." Jonah looked down at his heavy, scuffed combat boots. "These are tactical," he defended. "They provide ankle support and traction. They provide ugliness." Lyra teased. "On Valar, a warrior's armor is an art form. We engrave our history on our greaves. You Terrans just wear gray." "Gray blends in," Jonah countered. "Art gets you shot because you are shiny. I would rather be shiny and dead than wear those pants for eternity," Lyra said, her tone light but her eyes scanning the crowd with the same intensity as his. It was a deflection. Jonah knew it. She was terrified, but the banter kept the fear at bay. It created a small, mobile bubble of normalcy in a world that had gone mad. They reached the black docks around midday. It was a sector of the city built into the massive intake vents of the atmospheric recyclers. The noise was deafening, a constant thrumming roar of fans the size of skyscrapers. Jonah led them to a nondescript warehouse with a sign that read Raphael's Recycling and Waste Management. He pounded on the steel door. 3 knocks. Pause. 2 knocks. A viewing slot slid open. A pair of bloodshot eyes peered out. "We are closed," a voice growled. "Come back when you have trash worth burning." "It is me, Rafe," Jonah said. "Open the damn door." The eyes widened. "Jonah? The ghost of Sector 4? I thought you drank yourself to death years ago." "Open the door," Jonah repeated. The locks tumbled with a heavy clank. The door swung inward. Rafe stood there, a mountain of a man with a cybernetic arm that was stripped down to the chrome and gears. He wore a grease-stained mechanic's jumpsuit and a grin that was missing several teeth. "Well, look at what the cat dragged in." Rafe boomed, stepping aside to let them in. And he brought stray kittens. He looked at Lyra, and his grin faltered. He whistled low and long. "Jonah," Rafe said, looking back at his friend, "you have been holding out on me. Since when do you run with high-class Velari imports?" "She is a friend," Jonah said sharply. "We need transit chips. Rafe, clean ones. And we need to get off Rock. Today." Rafe closed the door and bolted it. He led them through a maze of disassembled hovercars and crates marked with hazard symbols. "Friend, huh?" Rafe muttered, eyeing Lyra's grace as she stepped over a pool of hydraulic fluid. "She is gorgeous, Jonah. And she has that look, the royalty look. You finally found a reason to fight again, did you?" "Just the chips," Jonah said. Rafe led them into a cluttered office that smelled of ozone and stale tobacco. He swept a pile of engine parts off a chair for Lyra and sat behind a desk that was more computer terminal than wood. "I can do the chips," Rafe said, his fingers flying across a holographic keyboard. "But getting off Rock is going to be tricky. The airspace is locked down tighter than a submarine's hatch." "Why?" Jonah asked. Rafe looked up, his expression serious now. "Vesper Dynamics," he said. "The weapons megacorp. They are moving heavy freight. I have seen their manifests. They are not shipping supplies to the colonies. They are shipping blockade runners." Jonah exchanged a look with Lyra. "They are engineering a crisis," Rafe continued. "I hear chatter on the darknet. Vesper has contracts with the Warhawks in the Senate, and they have been paying off Velari hardliners. They want the war back, Jonah. Peace is bad for business." Lyra stepped forward. "My uncle," she said. "Is he working with them?" Rafe looked at her, noting the accent, the bearing. "If your uncle is Lord Veilcor, then yes." Rafe said, "He is Vesper's golden boy. And I heard something else. General Harker is in the system." Jonah froze. The name hit him like a physical blow. Harker, his old commanding officer, the man who had given the order to fire on the diplomatic cruiser 10 years ago. "Harker is here?" Jonah asked, his voice hollow. "Landed this morning," Rafe confirmed, "with a Black Ops intelligence unit. They are not here for a vacation. Jonah, they are hunting." Rafe stood up. "I need an hour to forge the biometric headers on these chips. It is delicate work. You two go in the back room. Keep your heads down. If I see a probe, I will trigger the jammer." He ushered them into a small storage room behind the office and closed the door. The room was cramped, filled with shelving units stacked with contraband electronics. There was a single, narrow cot in the corner. Mirren, exhausted by the walk, curled up on the end of the cot and was asleep within seconds. Jonah and Lyra sat side by side on the edge of the mattress. There was nowhere else to go. Their knees were touching. The space was so small that Jonah could smell the scent of her, alien herbs, rain, and the faint ozone tang of her bioluminescence. The silence stretched, heavy and intimate. Jonah stared at his hands. He was thinking about Harker. He was thinking about the blood on his own hands. Lyra reached out and touched his forearm. Her cool fingers traced the jagged white line of a scar that ran from his wrist to his elbow. "Where did this come from?" she asked softly. "Was it the war?" Jonah looked at the scar. He could have told her about the shrapnel from a plasma grenade. He could have told her about the knife fight in the trenches of Jericho Prime. But he did not want to bring the war into this room. Not with her. "No," Jonah said, a dry smile touching his lips. "That was a bar fight in Sector 7, about 5 years ago. A guy bet me I could not drink a bottle of fusion fuel." "Did you?" Lyra asked, her eyes dancing with amusement. "I did not get the chance," Jonah said. "He tried to hit me with the bottle before I could start. I blocked it. It shattered. I spent the night in a med tank getting stitched up by a droid with a glitchy servo." Lyra laughed. It was a warm, throaty sound that made the cramped room feel suddenly brighter. "You Terrans are ridiculous," she said. "You fight over drinks." "And you do not?" Jonah asked. Lyra shook her head. "In the Vailari court, we do not use bottles. We use words. I once saw a diplomat accidentally insult a matriarch's breeding lineage by mispronouncing a verb. The matriarch did not yell. She just told a story about a flightless bird that tries to mate with rocks. She spoke for 20 minutes. The diplomat was so humiliated he resigned his commission and moved to a mining colony." Jonah chuckled. "That sounds worse than a broken bottle." "It is," Lyra agreed. Her smile faded slowly. "Bruises heal. Jonah. But words stay." She looked down at his hand, her fingers still resting on his arm. "Like the words they say about us," she whispered. "Monsters. Enemies." Jonah turned his hand over and caught hers. He interlaced their fingers. The contact was electric. "I do not think you are a monster." "Lyra." Lyra looked up at him. The playfulness was gone. Her eyes were wide, searching his face with a hunger that had nothing to do with food. "I am scared, Jonah," she confessed, "not of the soldiers. I am scared of failing Myron. I am scared that I do not know how to be anything other than a princess on the run." "You are doing fine," Jonah said. His voice dropped to a rough whisper. "You are the bravest person I have ever met." Lyra shifted closer, her shoulder pressed against his chest. The heat of her body soaked through his shirt. "I am not brave," she said. "I am just lonely." The word hung in the air. "Me too," Jonah said. He looked at her lips. He looked at the curve of her neck, where the glowing marks pulsed with a quickened rhythm. He knew this was wrong. He was a grunt. She was royalty. He was human. She was Vailari. There were 1,000 years of history and 1,000,000 dead bodies standing between them. But in this room, there was only the smell of rain and herbs, and the warmth of her hand in his. Lyra reached up. Her fingers grazed his jaw, the rough stubble scratching her skin. She traced the line of his mouth. "It feels wrong to want this," she whispered, "with everything that is happening, with who we are." "It feels right," Jonah said, "and that is what scares me." Lyra made a small sound, half sob, half sigh, then stopped talking. "Jonah Cole," she leaned in. This kiss was different from the one in the tunnel. That had been tentative, a question. This was an answer. Lyra kissed him with a fierce, searching hunger. She pressed her body against his, her hands tangling in his hair, pulling him down to her. It was a claim. It was an apology for the war she had not started but represented. It was a demand to be seen, to be held, to be more than just a symbol or a target. Jonah responded with equal force. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her onto his lap, burying his face in the curve of her neck. He tasted the alien salt of her skin. He felt the hum of her energy vibrating against his chest. Years of numbness, of gray routine and suppressed guilt, shattered under the force of her touch. They moved together with a desperate, clumsy urgency, seeking friction, seeking heat. It was the desire of two people standing on the edge of a cliff, grabbing onto the only solid thing they could find. They broke apart only when they ran out of air. Jonah rested his forehead against hers. His breathing was ragged. Lyra's eyes were dark, dilated, swirling with gold and violet light. Jonah started, but his voice failed him. We are crossing a line, Lyra finished for him. A line we cannot uncross. Jonah nodded. He ran his thumb over her lower lip, swollen from his kiss. I know, he said. The door burst open. Jonah and Lyra scrambled apart, Jonah's hand flying to his belt for a weapon, Lyra sliding off his lap to the edge of the cot. Rafe stood in the doorway, holding a data pad. He looked at Jonah's flushed face, then at Lyra's disheveled hair. He smirked. Sorry to interrupt the interspecies bonding time, Rafe drawled, but unless you want to bond in a detention cell, we need to move. Jonah stood up, smoothing his jacket, trying to regain his composure. Are the chips done? Jonah asked, his voice gruff. Rafe tossed two small translucent wafers to him. Done and encoded. They will identify you as independent contractors for a mining guild. It should get you past the perimeter checkpoints. He paused, his smirk vanishing. But I have bad news. Jonah. I tapped into the local comms relay. That intelligence unit? They are sweeping Sector 4. They raided your apartment. Jonah. Jonah went still. They know who I am. They know you are helping her, Rafe said. And Harker is leading the sweep personally. He is not delegating this. He wants you. Brother. Jonah looked at Lyra. She had gone pale. Why? Lyra asked. Why is a general hunting a shelf stalker? Because I know what he did, Jonah said grimly. And he knows I know. Rafe handed Jonah a heavy rucksack. I put some gear in here. Rations, medkits, and a kinetic pistol. It is not much, but it is better than bad language. I have a shuttle contact at the illicit port in Sector 9, a cargo hauler. It leaves in 40 minutes. Thank you. Rafe, Jonah said. Don't thank me, Rafe said. Just do not die. You owe me money. Jonah woke Myron, who rubbed her eyes and looked around confusedly. Are we going on another walk? She asked sleepily. Yes, sweetie, Lyra said, her voice trembling slightly as she smoothed the child's hair. A long walk. They hurried out of the warehouse, back into the roar of the intake vents. The city felt different now. It felt smaller, sharper. Every shadow looked like a soldier. Every drone looked like an assassin. They were moving toward the transit tube that would take them to Sector 9 when Lyra suddenly stopped. She gasped, clutching the side of her head. Lyra? Jonah grabbed her arm. What is it? Lyra's eyes lost focus. The markings on her temples flared with a blindingly bright white light. A transmission. She gasped. Encrypted. Burst signal. She swayed, and Jonah had to support her weight. It is a message from the Vailari resistance, she whispered, her voice filled with horror. What does it say? Jonah demanded. Lyra looked at him, and the terror in her eyes was absolute. My uncle has authorized total reclamation. Jonah cursed. He knew that term. It was a scorched earth protocol. It meant they were not just looking for a fugitive anymore. They were willing to burn down the haystack to find the needle. It means they are going to purge the lower levels, Lyra said, tears streaming down her face. They are going to erase the districts where we were seen, to cover their tracks, to kill the witnesses. She looked at the bustling crowds around them, the workers, the families, the street kids. They are going to kill everyone, she whispered. Because of me. Jonah grabbed her shoulders and shook her hard. No, he said fiercely. Not because of you. Because of them. Because they are evil. Do not you dare take that weight. Lyra! He looked around. The drones overhead seemed to be gathering, forming a swarm pattern. We have to get to that shuttle, Jonah said. We get to the shuttle, we get off rock, and we find a way to stop this. But we cannot stop it from a detention cell. Move! He picked up Myron, who had started to cry at her mother's distress. Move! Jonah commanded. They ran. They ran through the smog and the noise, toward the only hope they had left, while the city behind them began to tighten its noose. The game had changed. It was no longer a chase. It was a countdown. The illicit shuttle port in Sector 9 was less a spaceport and more a wound in the side of the megacity. A gaping, rust-rimmed hole where the atmospheric shielding had been bypassed by hackers and bribed officials. The air smelled of ozone, burning trash, and the metallic tang of unauthorized fusion drives. Jonah Cole adjusted the straps of the rucksack Rafe had given him, the weight of the kinetic pistol against his hip feeling both familiar and heavy. He kept one hand on Myron's shoulder, guiding the child through the steam and the shadows, while Lyra moved close beside him, her hood pulled low. The ship Rafe had arranged for them was an ugly, blocky thing called the Rusty Mule. It was a retrofitted orbital hauler that looked like it had been welded together from 3 different wrecks. The pilot, a nervous Tellarite with twitching whiskers, stood by the boarding ramp, checking a data pad with frantic taps. We are leaving in 5 minutes, the pilot squeaked, with or without you. The heat in this sector is rising. We are here, Jonah said, his voice cutting through the noise of the engines. Get the ramp down. As they hurried across the tarmac, Jonah scanned the perimeter. It was habit. It was the itch between his shoulder blades that had kept him alive on Jericho Prime. He looked past the mule, toward the upper docking rings where the high-end corporate ships berthed. His step faltered. Docked at a priority pylon, gleaming black and silver under the harsh floodlights, was a sleek interceptor. It was a phantom against the gray industrial smog. On its tail fin, painted in matte crimson, was the insignia of a 3-headed serpent, the Chimera. Jonah's blood ran cold. That was not just a security ship. That was the elite reconnaissance unit of the Terran Intelligence Service, General Harker's personal headhunters. They are already here, Jonah murmured, shoving Lyra toward the ramp. Move. Fast. Lyra saw the tension in his jaw. She did not ask questions. She scooped Myron up into her arms and sprinted up the metal incline, her boots clanging on the grate. Jonah followed, pausing only for a split second to glare at the black ship. They were closer than Rafe had thought. Inside, the mule was a cramped nightmare of exposed wiring and cargo netting. It smelled of hydraulic fluid and unwashed bodies. Jonah shoved them into a small passenger alcove behind the cockpit. Strap in, Jonah ordered, buckling Myron into a seat that was far too big for her. The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom. Initiating launch cycle. Hold on to your stomachs. Gravity stabilizers are a bit moody. The ship shuddered violently as the thrusters fired. Mirren let out a small squeak of fear, clutching the spinning light toy Jonah had bought her. Lyra reached across the aisle and took Jonah's hand. Her grip was iron hard. Her eyes, glowing softly in the dim cabin, sought reassurance. Jonah squeezed back, but he could not force a smile. He was watching the trajectory display on the bulkhead. The shuttle lurched upward, tearing through the smog layer of Halcyon 3. The gray city fell away, replaced by the black velvet of space and the blinding curve of the planet's horizon. "We made it," Lyra whispered, letting out a breath. Jonah watched the screen. They were supposed to vector toward deep orbit, to a neutral courier station near the moon. The ship banked hard to the left. "That is the wrong vector," Jonah said, unbuckling his harness. He moved toward the cockpit door. "Pilot," Jonah shouted, "you are drifting off course. Correct your heading." The intercom crackled again, but this time the voice was not the nervous Tellarite. It was a computerized, synthetic voice. Remote override engaged. Flight plan updated. Destination: Vesper Dynamics Orbital Platform Alpha 9. Jonah froze. He slammed his fist against the cockpit door. It was magnetically sealed. "Rafe's contact sold us out," Jonah growled. "Or they got to him before we did." Lyra stared at the viewport. Ahead of them, looming like a mechanical spider against the stars, was a massive orbital structure. It bristled with docking clamps and weapon batteries. The hull was emblazoned with the Vesper Dynamics logo, a stylized sun eclipsing a planet. "We are flying straight into the throat of the beast," Lyra said, her voice trembling. Jonah grabbed the rucksack. He checked the pistol. "Stay behind me," he said. "When that door opens, it is going to get ugly." The rusty mule shuddered as it was caught by a tractor beam. The engines whined in protest, then died. Silence filled the cabin, heavy and suffocating. The shuttle was dragged inexorably toward the platform's hangar bay. The docking clamps engaged with a metallic thunderclap. The airlock hissed. Jonah leveled the pistol at the hatch. The door slid open. Jonah did not fire. There were too many of them. Standing in the hangar beyond were 2 squads of armored troopers, their pulse rifles raised and aimed directly at Jonah's chest. They wore the charcoal gray armor of Vesper corporate security, reinforced by the black tactical gear of the Chimera unit. In the center of the formation stood 2 men. One was a slick corporate executive in a tailored suit that cost more than the entire block Jonah lived on. He held a datapad casually, as if checking stocks. The other man was older. He wore a dress uniform with a general's stars on the collar. His hair was iron gray, cut into a severe military crop. His face was lined with the kind of hard, unyielding authority that crushed planets. "General Harker." "Lower the weapon. Sergeant Cole," Harker said. His voice was calm, warm even. It echoed in the hangar bay. "You have nowhere to go, and I would hate to see you die in a cargo hauler." Jonah's hand shook. He looked at the 20 rifles pointed at him. He looked back at Lyra, who was shielding Myron with her body. "Do it," Lyra whispered. "We cannot fight this. Not here." Jonah slowly lowered the pistol. He set it on the deck and kicked it away. "Smart man," Harker said. He gestured to the troopers. "Secure them, gently. They are guests." The soldiers moved in, surrounding them. They did not use cuffs, but the threat of violence was in every movement. They escorted the group out of the shuttle and onto the pristine, polished deck of the platform. The transition was jarring. They went from the grime of the lower city to a world of sterile white walls, panoramic viewports, and soft lighting. Harker walked beside Jonah, matching his stride. "You look tired, Jonah," Harker said, sounding like a disappointed father. "I heard you were stacking shelves. A waste of talent." "I like stacking shelves," Jonah said, his voice flat. "The boxes do not scream when you drop them." Harker chuckled dryly. "Still got that dark humor." "I missed that," They were led into a large conference room that overlooked the planet below. The view was breathtaking. The swirling clouds, the glittering lights of the megacities. The executive, a man introduced as Director Kale, gestured for them to sit at a long obsidian table. Lyra sat stiffly, pulling Myron onto her lap. Jonah sat across from Harker. "Let us skip the pleasantries," Jonah said. "You have us. What do you want?" "We want stability," Director Kyle said smoothly. "The galaxy is fragile, Mr. Cole. The economy is stagnant. The peace treaty with the Vailari has left a power vacuum that chaos is rushing to fill." "So you start a war to fix the economy?" Jonah asked. "Conflict drives innovation," Kale corrected, "and it unifies populations, but to manage a conflict we need leverage." Harker leaned forward. "We need the gate. Jonah." He pointed at Mirren. "The girl is the key. We know about the genetic markers. We know she can stabilize the ancient Vailari transit network. Imagine it, instantaneous travel across sectors, but controlled, monitored, by us, by Vesper." Lyra spat. "You want to turn my people's legacy into a toll road for your weapons shipments?" "We want to secure humanity's future," Harker said. "And yours, Princess. Your uncle understands this. He is a pragmatist. He knows that the Vailari Empire is crumbling. An alliance with Vesper ensures your survival." "Alliance?" Lyra laughed bitterly. "You are bombing my people. You are hunting me like an animal. Necessary measures," Harker said with a shrug, "to bring you here." He turned his gaze to Jonah. "And you, Jonah, you are a wild card. But you are also one of mine." Harker opened a holographic file on the table. It showed Jonah's service record, the medals, the commendations, and the discharge papers marked with psychological trauma. "I can fix this," Harker said, tapping the file. "I can wipe the slate clean. Full reinstatement, a command position, a pension that will let you live like a king on any world you choose. All you have to do is convince her to cooperate." Jonah looked at the file. He looked at the offer. It was everything he had told himself he wanted for 10 years. Redemption. Respect. "I am not your soldier anymore." "Harker," Jonah said quietly, "I am done following orders." Harker sighed. He looked genuinely saddened. "I was afraid you would say that. You always were an idealist. It is what made you a great sergeant and a terrible survivor." Harker stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the stars. "You know, Lyra," Harker said, his back to them. "Jonah is being very modest. He is a hero of the Republic. He played a pivotal role in the final days of the war." Jonah's stomach dropped. He felt a sudden, sickening premonition. "Harker, do not," Jonah warned. "Did he ever tell you about the Perseus cluster?" Harker asked, ignoring Jonah. Lyra looked at Jonah, her brow furrowed. "No," she said slowly. "He does not talk about the war." "He was there," Harker said, turning around. "He was commanding a heavy weapons platoon. They were tasked with intercepting a Vailari blockade runner that was suspected of carrying a planetary killer bomb." Jonah stood up. "Shut up. Harker, sit down." "Sergeant," Harker barked. The command voice was so ingrained that Jonah instinctively froze. The ship was called the Star of Vail. Harker continued, his eyes locked on Lyra. It was not a blockade runner. It was a diplomatic cruiser. It was carrying the Vailari peace delegation, including the High Matriarch. And her young son, Lyra, went white. Her hand flew to her mouth. "No," she whispered. That was a tragic accident, a mechanical failure. "That is the official story," Harker said. "The truth is, we ordered it destroyed. We could not let the peace happen. Not yet. The terms were unfavorable." He pointed a finger at Jonah. Sergeant Cole's unit fired the torpedoes. He gave the order. He pulled the trigger. Lyra turned to Jonah. Her eyes were wide, filled with a horror so profound it looked like madness. "Jonah?" she asked. Her voice was barely a sound. "Is that true?" Jonah felt the room spinning. He felt the bile rising in his throat. I did not know." Jonah stammered. He looked at Lyra, begging her to understand. "The intel, they told us it was a weapon. They told us it was going to glass the colony. I saw the heat signatures. I saw the drive plume. But you fired," Lyra said. She stood up, Myron sliding off her lap. "You fired. I followed orders." Jonah shouted, the confession tearing out of him. "I was a soldier. If I had not fired, millions would have died. That is what they told me. But my mother died." Lyra screamed. Her bioluminescence flared violently, turning a blinding, angry white. "My brother died. He was 4 years old. Jonah, he was playing with blocks when you vaporized him." Jonah flinched as if she had struck him. The memory he had suppressed for a decade, the silent flash of the explosion, the way the ship had simply ceased to exist, came rushing back. But now, superimposed over the wreckage, he saw Marin's face. He saw Lyra's face. "I am sorry," Jonah whispered. "I am so sorry." "Sorry?" Lyra laughed. It was a jagged, broken sound. "You are a murderer. You are the reason my world burned. You are the reason I am a beggar." She backed away from him, pulling Marin with her. She looked at him with revulsion. The connection they had built, the intimacy in the dark room, the kiss, it all turned to ash. "Do not touch me," she hissed. "Do not ever come near us again." Harker watched the scene with a satisfied, predatory smile. He had severed the bond. He had isolated the threat. Take the girl and the mother to the secure lab. Harker ordered the guards. Prep them for the interface procedure. "No!" Jonah lunged forward. A trooper slammed the butt of his rifle into Jonah's stomach. Jonah doubled over, wheezing. Another trooper kicked him in the ribs, sending him sprawling to the floor. "Take Sergeant Cole to the debriefing cells," Harker said calmly. "Let him think about his choices. Maybe after a few days in the dark, he will be ready to come home." Guards grabbed Lyra and Myron. Myron began to wail, reaching out a small hand toward Jonah. "Jonah, help us! Jonah!" Jonah tried to get up, but a boot pressed his face into the polished floor. He watched helplessly as they dragged Lyra away. She did not look back at him. Her face was set in a mask of frozen hate, but Myron looked. Just before the doors slid shut, Myron locked eyes with him. Her face was streaked with tears. She looked terrified, confused, and utterly betrayed. She looked at him like he was her hero, and he was letting the monsters take her. The doors closed. "Get him up," the guard growled. They hauled Jonah to his feet. He was bleeding from the nose. His ribs screamed in protest. He slumped in their grip, looking broken. He let them drag him down the pristine white corridors. He let them throw him into a small, windowless holding cell. He let them engage the magnetic locks on the door. He sat on the narrow bench in the corner, his head in his hands. He should just stay here. He deserved this. He was a monster. Harker was right. He had pulled the trigger. He had killed the boy who would have been Lyra's brother. He closed his eyes and saw the explosion again. But then, the image shifted. He saw Mirren spinning the light toy. He saw her eating the pink sugar. He heard her laugh. "Jonah, help us." He opened his eyes. He was a murderer. That was a fact. He could not change the past. He could not bring back the dead. But he could stop the bastards from adding 2 more names to the list. Jonah stood up. The broken man vanished. The shelf stalker vanished. He walked to the door panel. He examined the sensor array. It was a standard Vesper lock, high security but lazy engineering. They relied on the magnetic seal, assuming the prisoner would be too demoralized to try anything. Jonah ripped a button off his jacket. He jammed it into the gap between the door and the frame, right over the magnetic contact point. It would not open the door, but it would create a microscopic gap in the circuit. He waited. 10 minutes later, the guard on patrol walked by. He glanced through the viewing slit. Jonah was lying on the floor, convulsing, foam bubbling from his mouth. He had chewed a ration tablet into a paste to fake the seizure. "Shit," the guard muttered. He keyed the door. The lock disengaged with a click, but the button jammed the slide mechanism. The door stuck half open. The guard grunted and shoved the door hard to clear the jam. He stepped inside, his stun baton raised. "Hey, prisoner, get up!" Jonah stopped convulsing instantly. He swept the guard's legs. It was a vicious, precise movement. The guard hit the floor with a heavy thud. Before he could draw a breath to shout, Jonah was on him. He drove his fist into the man's temple. No one strike. Lights out. Jonah grabbed the guard's keycard and his sidearm, a heavy pulse pistol. He stripped the guard of his comms unit and clipped it to his ear. He stepped out into the corridor. He checked the corners. Clear. He moved. He did not run. He stalked. He moved with the quiet, terrifying purpose of a man who has nothing left to lose but his target. In the secure laboratory, Lyra was strapped to a vertical scanning frame. Clamps held her wrists and ankles. A ring of emitters rotated slowly around her, bathing her in a harsh blue light. Across the room, Myron was inside a glass isolation pod. She was pounding on the glass with her small fists, screaming soundlessly. Technicians in white coats moved around Lyra, checking monitors. "Subject alpha genetic resonance is high," one of them muttered. "The hybrid markers are active. We can begin extraction in 5 minutes." "Extraction?" Lyra asked, her voice rasping. "What are you going to do?" "We need to isolate the sequencing code," the technician said indifferently. "It is in your marrow, Princess. It will be painful." Lyra strained against the restraints. She looked at Myron. "Do not touch her," Lyra screamed. "Take me. Leave her alone." "We need both," the technician said. "Redundancy." Lyra closed her eyes. Tears leaked out. She thought of Jonah. The hate flared hot and bright, but beneath it was a crushing despair. She had trusted him. She had let him in, and he was just another part of the machine that chewed up her world. She was alone. She had always been alone. The door to the lab exploded. It was not a subtle entry. The blast lock shattered inward. Smoke filled the entrance. 2 guards stationed by the door dropped before they could raise their rifles. 2 clean shots to the chest armor, knocking the wind out of them, followed by stun rounds to the neck. Jonah stepped through the smoke. He looked terrible. His face was bruised, his jacket torn. But he held the pulse pistol with rock-steady hands. "Step away from the console," Jonah roared. The technician scrambled back. "Hands in the air. Jonah!" Myron's muffled voice came from the pod. Jonah crossed the room in 3 strides. He keyed the release on Myron's pod. The glass hissed open. Myron threw herself at him, wrapping her arms around his leg. Jonah kept his gun trained on the door, but his hand dropped briefly to touch Myron's hair. "I got you, kid," he rasped. He turned to Lyra. She was staring at him. Her expression was not relief. It was a war zone of emotions, anger, confusion, and a reluctant, painful hope. Jonah shot the clamps holding her wrists. Sparks flew. The restraints snapped open. Lyra slumped forward. Jonah caught her. She stiffened in his arms. She pushed him away violently. "Do not touch me," she snarled. "We can argue later," Jonah said, his voice hard. "Right now, we fight. Or Mirren dies. Your call." "Princess." Lyra looked at Myron. She looked at the door, where the sound of heavy boots was approaching. Alarm klaxons began to blare. She glared at Jonah. "Give me a weapon," she demanded. Jonah handed her a spare stun baton he had taken from the guard. "Cover the left flank," he ordered, the corridor outside filled with Vesper security troops. Blaster fire erupted, streaking through the lab door, shattering equipment. Jonah flipped a heavy medical table for cover. He pulled Lyra and Myron behind it. "Stay low!" he yelled. He popped up, firing controlled bursts. He took down a trooper, then another. He was a machine. He was calculating angles, counting rounds, suppressing the enemy fire, but there were too many of them. "Lyra! I need an opening!" Jonah shouted over the roar of plasma fire. Lyra closed her eyes. She reached deep into the well of her bioluminescence, tapping into the energy that flowed through her blood. She stood up. Her markings flared with blinding intensity. She thrust her hand forward. A pulse of harmonic energy rippled through the air. It slammed into the soldiers' helmets, overloading their comms and vision sensors with a high-frequency feedback screech. The troopers screamed, clutching their ears, staggering back. "Now!" Lyra yelled. Jonah stood and fired. Accurate, lethal. He cleared the doorway. "Move!" They sprinted out of the lab, into the chaotic corridor. They moved as a unit. Jonah took point, clearing corners. Lyra watched the rear, using short bursts of energy to disrupt door locks and camera feeds. They were fighting back to back. Their bodies moved with an instinctive synchronization that defied the hatred currently burning between them. They were a perfect team, even as their hearts were at war. They reached a service hatch. Jonah blew the lock and shoved them inside. They tumbled into a narrow maintenance shaft that ran between the station's bulkheads. It was dark, hot, and noisy. Jonah leaned against the wall, reloading his pistol. Lyra stood opposite him, breathing hard, the blue light of her skin illuminating the cramped space. Myron huddled between them, looking from one to the other. Lyra looked at Jonah. The adrenaline was fading, leaving room for the rage to return. "You killed them," she whispered. "You killed my family, I know," Jonah said. He did not look away. "I live with it every day. You lied to me," she accused. "You let me kiss you. You let me trust you. And all the time, you were the butcher of Perseus." "I did not know it was you," Jonah shouted back, his voice cracking. "I did not know who was on that ship until 10 minutes ago. Do you think I wanted that? Do you think I enjoyed it?" "It does not matter what you wanted," Lyra cried. "Dead is dead. You took everything from me, then shoot me." Jonah tossed the pistol to her feet. It clattered on the grate. "Pick it up. Shoot me. Finish the war. Lyra!" Lyra looked at the gun. She looked at Jonah's face, broken, desperate, pleading for judgment. Her hand twitched. She wanted to. God, she wanted to. But then she looked at Myron. Myron, who was alive because of this man. Myron, who was clutching Jonah's leg again. Lyra let out a scream of frustration. She kicked the gun back toward him. "I cannot," she sobbed. "I cannot be like you. I cannot kill the person who saved my daughter." She slid down the wall, burying her face in her hands. "But I hate you, Jonah. I hate you so much." Jonah picked up the gun. He holstered it. His face was a mask of grim acceptance. "That is fair," he said softly. "I hate me too." He checked the data pad on his wrist. "We are near the hangar bays. There is a secondary launch deck for executive escape shuttles, fast ships, warp-capable." He looked at Lyra. "We get to the ship. We get you to the gate. We stop Harker. And then I walk away. You never have to see me again. Deal?" Lyra wiped her eyes. She stood up. Her face was cold, composed, royal. "Deal," she said. They moved through the shaft in silence. The romantic tension that had been there before was still present, but now it was twisted, painful, sharp as broken glass. They were drawn to each other by gravity and repelled by history. They reached the hangar. A small, sleek courier shuttle sat on the pad. Jonah hot-wired the access panel. The ramp lowered. "Get in." As they boarded, the hangar doors blew open. Harker strode in, flanked by a squad of Chimera elites. "Stop them," Harker ordered. Plasma fire raked the hull of the shuttle. Jonah jumped into the pilot's seat. He slammed the thrusters to maximum. "Hold on." The shuttle shot out of the hangar bay, tearing through the atmospheric shield. It spun wildly as Jonah engaged the evasive maneuvers, dodging the flak from the station's turrets. He punched in the coordinates Lyra gave him. "Where are we going?" Jonah yelled over the roar of the engines. Lyra stood behind his chair, staring out at the stars. "The forbidden sector," she said grimly. "The dead zone. That is where the gate is." Jonah engaged the warp drive. The stars stretched into lines of light. They jumped. They were safe for the moment. But in the silence of the cockpit, the distance between Jonah and Lyra felt wider than the void outside. They were partners in survival, but enemies in spirit. And they were flying straight into the ghosts of the past. The stolen courier shuttle shuddered as it dropped out of warp, the stars snapping from streaks of white fire back into pinpricks of cold light. Jonah Cole gripped the flight controls, his knuckles white, fighting the nausea that came with a rough jump. Ahead of them, filling the viewport, hung a gas giant of swirling blue and white storms. It was a bruised jewel in the darkness, vast and terrifying. Orbiting this behemoth was a station that looked like a picked carcass. It was an ancient Terran mining rig, its skeletal girders twisting into the void. But fused into the rusted metal was something else. A massive crystalline ring, easily 2 kilometers in diameter, cut through the station's structure. It glowed with a faint, dormant violet pulse. It did not look built. It looked grown. It was beautiful and alien, a diamond jammed into a pile of scrap iron. "The Vailari Gate," Lyra whispered, stepping up behind Jonah's chair. "It is real," Jonah murmured. He had heard the stories in the barracks, legends of the old transit network the Vailari had abandoned centuries ago. He had thought they were ghost stories. "It is asleep," Lyra said, "but it is dreaming." She looked down at Mirren, who was buckled into the co-pilot seat, clutching her spinning light toy. The toy's small LEDs seemed to harmonize with the massive ring outside, blinking in a strange, synchronized rhythm. "This structure is not just a door." "Jonah," Lyra explained, her voice tight. "It is an amplifier. In the old days, we used it to fold space, to bridge worlds for trade and art. But the frequency can be inverted." "Inverted how?" Jonah asked, leveling the shuttle toward a landing bay that looked structural sound. "It can create gravitational shears," Lyra said. "If activated improperly, it does not transport ships. It strands them. It collapses the localized trade lanes. It could turn a sector into a prison." "And Myron?" Jonah asked, glancing at the girl. Lyra placed a hand on Mirren's head. "She is the bridge. Her genetic code, the hybrid sequence, it acts as a stabilizer. Without her, the gate is just a monument. With her, it is the most powerful strategic asset in the galaxy." Jonah looked at the child. Myron was humming a nonsense song, spinning her toy. She was the reason fleets were burning fuel to get here. She was the trigger for a galactic war. He felt a surge of protectiveness so fierce it made his chest ache. He wanted to wrap her in armor. He wanted to hide her in a cupboard. "We are landing," Jonah announced, his voice rough. "Hold on." He guided the shuttle through the debris field. The landing was hard. a metal-on-metal screech that sent sparks flying past the canopy. They came to a rest in a cavernous, unpressurized hangar bay. "Suit up," Jonah ordered. "We do not know if the life support is holding." They donned emergency breath masks found in the shuttle's lockers. Jonah checked his pistol. He had one clip left. Not enough for a war, just enough for a last stand. They moved into the station's airlock. The cycle light turned green, and air hissed into the chamber. The atmosphere sensors read breathable. Though stale and cold, they walked into the station's promenade. It was a ghost town of overturned tables and shattered viewports. Suddenly, shadows detached themselves from the darkness of a corridor. Jonah raised his weapon instantly. "Hold fire," Lyra shouted, stepping in front of him. The figures stepped into the light. They were Vailari, 6 of them. They wore tattered robes and scavenged armor, their bioluminescence dim from malnutrition and despair. At the front was an elderly Vailari male, his face a map of wrinkles, leaning heavily on a staff made of twisted conduit pipe. "Lyra?" the old man rasped, his voice trembling with disbelief. "Princess Lyra?" Lyra pulled off her mask. Tears welled in her violet eyes. "Valen," she choked out. The old man dropped his staff and fell to his knees. The others followed, bowing their heads in a gesture of profound reverence. "We thought the line was broken." Valen wept. "We thought the light had gone out." Lyra ran to him, kneeling on the dirty deck to embrace him. It was a reunion of survivors, desperate and tender. Mirren watched, wide-eyed, until Valen looked up and saw the child, and the little star. Valen whispered, reaching out a shaking hand to touch Myron's cheek. "The hybrid. She has your mother's eyes." He then looked at Jonah. His expression hardened instantly. "And you bring a Terran," Valen spat, "a soldier." "He is my guard," Lyra said firmly, helping Valen to his feet. "He is the reason we are breathing." Valen eyed Jonah with deep suspicion but bowed slightly. "A strange age," he muttered. When the wolf guards the lamb, they were led deeper into the station, to a habitation ring where the Loyalists had established a makeshift camp. It was warm here, lit by glow lamps. They offered Jonah and Lyra bowls of protein gruel, meager rations, but given with the hospitality of a palace feast. Over the meal, the truth came out. Valen had been the High Matriarch's communications officer. He had saved the encrypted data cores before the capital fell to Lyra's uncle. "We have the records," Valen said, activating a holographic projector on the table. It showed jagged lines of credit transfers and communication logs. "Your uncle did not act alone." "Lyra," Valen explained. "He was funded, heavily." "By whom?" Jonah asked, though he already suspected the answer. "Vesper Dynamics," Valen confirmed, "and through them, a cabal of Terran generals. They called it Operation Glass Ceiling. The peace treaty was going to open up trade, deregulate the Outer Rim. It would have destroyed Vesper's profit margins on long-range munitions." Jonah stared at the data. "So they killed the peace delegation," Jonah said, his voice hollow. "They killed Lyra's mother. They blamed it on rogue elements to justify a military buildup. And my uncle gets the throne," Lyra said, her voice shaking with rage. "And Vesper gets a forever war. It was never about ideology. It was never about our species being incompatible. It was just math. It was just profit." She stood up, pacing the small room. Her markings were flaring bright, angry red. "I want to use the gate," she declared. Valen looked at her warily. "To do what, my princess?" "To cut them off," Lyra said. She pointed at the schematic of the gate. "You said it can create shears. We can collapse the transit lanes leading to the Velari homeworld. We can strand my uncle's fleet in the void. We can starve his regime until he begs for mercy. Jonah watched her. He saw the fire in her eyes. It was the same fire he had seen in the mirrors of the barracks before a drop. It was the righteous fury that convinced you that murder was justice. That will kill thousands, Valen warned gently. Supply ships. Civilians. Conscripts who are only following orders. I do not care, Lyra shouted. They killed my mother. They hunted my daughter. I want them to hurt. I want to burn it all down. Revenge is a cold bed, Lyra, Jonah said quietly. Lyra spun on him. Do not lecture me on morality. Jonah, not you. I am not lecturing, Jonah said. I am warning you. He stood up and walked over to her. He ignored the glares of the Velari loyalists. I spent 10 years trying to drink away the faces of the people I killed for a cause I thought was just... Jonah said. I thought killing the enemy would make me feel safe. I thought it would make the nightmares stop. He looked down at his hands. It does not. It just adds more ghosts to the room. If you use that gate as a weapon, you become Harker. You become your uncle. And someday, Myron will look at you the way you looked at me in that hangar. Lyra flinched. The anger drained out of her, leaving her standing there, small and trembling. Then what do I do? She whispered. Just let them win? No, Jonah said. We fight, but we fight smart, and we keep our souls. The station's rotation cycle brought night, or a simulation of it. The lights in the habitation ring dimmed. Myron fell asleep on a pile of cushions, guarded by 2 of the loyalists who watched her as if she were a deity. Jonah found Lyra in a small observation chamber at the edge of the ring. The blast shields were retracted, offering a panoramic view of the gas giant below. Lightning storms the size of continents arced through the clouds, silent and violent. Lyra was leaning her forehead against the cool, transparent steel. I should hate you, she said without turning. I know, Jonah replied. He stood a few feet behind her, giving her space. I tried to hate you, Lyra continued. In the shuttle, in the tunnels. I told myself you were just a trigger man. A tool. She turned around. Her eyes were dark pools reflecting the storms outside. But you are not a tool. You are a man who bought expired pie. You are a man who hates himself more than I ever could. She took a step toward him. I am so confused, Jonah. I look at you and I see the fire that took my family. But then I look at you and I see the only person who makes me feel safe. Jonah swallowed hard. His throat felt tight. I do not deserve it, he rasped. I do not deserve to be standing here with you. That is not for you to decide, Lyra said. She reached out and took his hand. Her fingers were cool. We are both broken things, Jonah. We are both wreckage from the same war. Maybe that is why we fit. Jonah looked at her. He saw the scars he had left on her life. He saw the grief he had caused. But he also saw forgiveness. It was a terrifying, humbling thing. He stepped closer. He lifted his hands and cupped her face. His thumbs brushed away the tears that were spilling onto her glowing cheeks. I have never felt anything like this, Jonah confessed, his voice barely a whisper. Being near you, it hurts, it burns. But if I step away, I feel like I am dying. Then do not step away, Lyra breathed. She closed the distance. There was no hesitation this time, no awkwardness. They came together with the force of a collision. Jonah wrapped his arms around her waist, lifting her slightly, pulling her against him as if he could merge their bodies into one. Lyra clung to his shoulders, her fingers digging into his jacket. They kissed with desperate honesty. It was a kiss that tasted of salt and desperation, a kiss that acknowledged the fleets coming to kill them, the galaxy that wanted them dead, and the fragile, impossible miracle that they were still alive. The armor of guilt and prejudice that they had both worn for so long cracked and fell away. In the dim light of the storm, they were not Terran and Vailari. They were not soldier and princess. They were just two terrified, lonely souls finding harbor in the dark. They sank down onto the floor of the observation deck, wrapped in each other's arms. They did not speak. There were no words left that mattered. They just held on. They clung to each other as the lightning flashed outside, illuminating their entangled forms, a tableau of defiance against the void. Morning on the station was marked only by the brightening of the ambient lights. Jonah woke with Lyra's head resting on his chest. For a moment. Just a heartbeat. He forgot where he was. He forgot the bounty. He forgot Harker. He just felt the steady rhythm of her breathing and the warmth of her skin. Then reality rushed back in. He tightened his arm around her. Lyra stirred and looked up. Her eyes were clear, the bioluminescence soft and steady. "Good morning," she whispered. "Morning," Jonah said. They stood up and adjusted their clothes. There was a shift in the dynamic. They moved around each other with a new, fluid intimacy, a hand on the small of the back, a shared glance that communicated volumes. They were a team now, a unit. But the weight of what was coming hung over them like a guillotine blade. They returned to the command center. Valen was there, staring at a sensor display that was lighting up with angry red icons. "They are here," Valen said grimly. Jonah looked at the screen. Two fleets had dropped out of warp on opposite sides of the gas giant. To the north, the angular black silhouettes of the Terran Intelligence Task Force. Harker's fleet. To the south, the ornate, sweeping hulls of the Vailari Royal Navy. Lyra's uncle. "They are broadcasting on open channels," Valen said. "Put it on speakers," Jonah ordered. The room filled with static. Then Harker's voice cut through, smooth and menacing. "This is General Harker of the Terran Republic, to the occupants of Station 44 Zulu. You are harboring a fugitive of the state and a stolen biological asset. Surrender them immediately, or we will commence orbital bombardment." Then, a second voice overrode the first. It was deeper, melodic but cold as ice. "This is Lord Vale Kor. The female Lyra and the hybrid child are property of the Void Throne. Hand them over to my flagship, or I will reduce your station to dust." A three-way standoff. Harker wanted them. The uncle wanted them. And neither could afford to let the other have them. "They are going to fire," Jonah said, studying the tactical plot. "They are just waiting for the other side to blink." Lyra looked at the screen. She looked at Myron, who was sitting in the corner, building a tower out of scrap metal. Lyra's face set into a mask of resolve. "Valen," she said, "is the gate's communication array functional?" The old advisor blinked. "The array? Yes. It was designed to broadcast navigation data to the entire network. But the range is limited." "Not if we use the gate to boost the signal," Lyra said. Jonah looked at her. He saw the plan forming in her mind. "What are you thinking?" Jonah asked. Lyra turned to the group. "We do not use the gate to collapse the route. We do not use it to kill them. We use it to talk." She pointed to the data cores Valen had saved. "We take the logs, the proof of Vesper's funding, the proof of the collaboration between Harker and my uncle, and we feed it into the gate's broadcast system." She looked at Myron. "Myron can key the sequence. The gate will amplify the signal 1 billion times. It will not just go to the fleets. It will go to every receiver in the sector, every news feed, every government outpost, every civilian ship. Jonah realized the brilliance and the danger of it. "You want to turn the lights on," Jonah said. "You want to show the whole galaxy the cockroaches in the kitchen?" "Exactly," Lyra said. "If we expose the conspiracy, their crews will mutiny. The governments will have to distance themselves. Harker and my uncle will lose their legitimacy in seconds." "But you are painting a target on Myron," Jonah argued, his protective instinct flaring. "If she activates that gate, the whole universe will know what she is. She will never be safe. She will be a beacon." Lyra looked at her daughter. Her expression was pained but unyielding. "She is already a target, Jonah. Secrecy has not protected us. It has only made us easy to hunt." She turned to Jonah, her eyes pleading for him to understand. "Truth is the only shield that lasts. Jonah, we have to bet on the truth." Jonah looked at the tactical map. The red icons were inching closer. He looked at Lyra. He saw the woman he loved. Yes, he realized with a jolt. He loved her, standing tall against the dark. "Okay," Jonah said. He checked his pistol. He turned to Valen. "Get the data ready. Lyra, get Myron to the interface." He walked to the heavy blast doors of the command center. "I will hold the corridor," Jonah said. "Because once that broadcast starts, they are going to stop threatening and start storming." Lyra walked over to him. She kissed him quickly, fiercely. "Do not die," she ordered. "I will try not to," Jonah said. He watched her lead Myron toward the glowing interface of the gate controls. Jonah took a deep breath. He racked the slide on his pistol. "Let's finish this." The station was screaming. It was a mechanical agony, a cacophony of klaxons, structural groanings, and the shrill, terrified whistle of atmospheric scrubbers pushed beyond their red lines. The tactical display in the command center was a sea of crimson wash, drowning out the few green blips of friendly signals. Jonah Cole stood by the heavy blast doors, checking the charge on his stolen pulse rifle. His hands were steady. The shaking that had plagued him for 10 years, the tremor of a survivor who did not want to survive, was gone. In its place was a cold, crystalline focus. "They are locking weapons," Valen shouted from the sensor console, his aged voice cracking over the din. "Both fleets, Harker's destroyers and Lord Veilcor's dreadnoughts. They have targeted the habitation ring." "How long?" Jonah asked, not looking back. 2 minutes, Valen replied. "Maybe less before the firing solutions synchronize." Jonah turned to Lyra. "We need to move," he said. "Now." Lyra nodded. She looked terrified, her skin pale, the bioluminescent markings on her neck flashing in rapid, erratic pulses. But her jaw was set. She held Myron's hand tightly. The child was clutching the cheap plastic spinning toy Jonah had bought her in the sunken market. It was battered now, scratched from their escape, but Myron held it like a talisman. She looked up at Jonah, her violet eyes wide but surprisingly dry. "Are the bad men coming?" Myron asked. It was a simple question, asked with the brutal pragmatism of a child who has spent her life running. "Yes," Jonah said. He knelt down, bringing his face level with hers. "But we are going to do something they do not expect. We are going to turn on the lights." Lyra squeezed Myron's hand. "Sweetie," she said softly. "We need to go to the big room with the crystal arches. Do you remember the game we played with the data pad? How you made the numbers change colors?" Myron nodded. "We need you to do that for the whole station," Lyra explained. "We need you to open the big door." "Will it stop the noise?" Myron asked, looking at the ceiling where the red alert lights pulsed. Jonah put a hand on her small shoulder. "It will stop everything, kid, I promise." No one is going to take you away, not while I am breathing. Myron studied his face. She saw the scar, the grit, the hard lines of a man who had seen hell. She nodded, trusting him with a purity that broke Jonah's heart. Okay, Myron said. Let us turn on the lights. They ran. The corridors of the derelict station were a maze of shadows and flashing strobes. Jonah took point, moving with a fluid, lethal grace. Every corner was cleared, every sight line checked. The Vailari loyalists formed a protective ring around Lyra and Myron, their scavenged weapons raised. They reached the gate control core. It was a cathedral of technology. Massive crystalline arches rose from the floor, curving upward to meet a central spire that pulsed with a deep, rhythmic violet light. The air here hummed with energy, a vibration that rattled the teeth and made the hair on Jonah's arms stand up. The interface was a pedestal of black obsidian near the edge of the chamber, overlooking the void where the massive ring of the gate waited outside. Valen rushed to the data input console. I am uploading the files now, he shouted, and the financial trails from the assassination orders, the comms logs between Harker and Vesper Dynamics. It is all queued. Lyra led Myron to the obsidian pedestal. Okay, Myron, Lyra whispered. Just place your hand on the panel. Don't be scared. It will feel like holding a warm cup of tea. Myron hesitated. She looked at the glowing surface. She looked at the toy in her other hand. Jonah stood by the entrance, watching the blast doors slide shut. He could hear the thud of docking clamps engaging on the station's outer hull. They are boarding, Jonah announced. We are out of time. Myron reached out. Her small, pale hand touched the black stone. The reaction was instantaneous. A shockwave of light exploded from the pedestal. It was not violent, it was harmonic. A pure, ringing tone swept through the chamber, resonant and clear. Myron gasped, but she did not pull away. The hybrid markings on her arms and neck, usually hidden, flared with brilliant, blinding white light. The gate outside woke up, through the viewports. Jonah saw the massive ring ignite. It did not form a singularity or a wormhole. Instead, it became a lens. The data Valen had queued hit the energy stream. It was not a broadcast. It was a tsunami. In the void outside, on the bridge of the Terran flagship Aegis. The tactical officer tore his headset off with a scream of pain. Sir, massive signal spike. It is everywhere. What do you mean everywhere? The captain roared. Jam it! We cannot. It is riding the gate carrier wave. It is bypassing our firewalls. It is on the civilian bands. It is on the emergency frequencies. It is... The main view screen on the bridge flickered. The tactical map vanished. In its place, a stream of documents began to scroll at high speed. Video logs appeared in picture-in-picture windows. It was a recording of General Harker. He was sitting in a Vesper Dynamics boardroom, laughing. The war is a product, gentlemen, the recorded Harker said, swirling a glass of amber liquid. We do not need to win it. We just need to sustain it. The Vailari are useful boogeymen. We sink the peace treaty. We secure the defense budget for the next 50 years. On the bridge of the Vailari dreadnought Void's hammer, a similar scene was playing out. The crew watched in stunned silence as a holographic recording of Lord Vailcor appeared. My niece is an obstacle. The uncle sneered in the recording. Let the Terrans have the colony. I want the throne. If a few thousand of our people burn to make it happen, so be it. They are acceptable losses. The silence that fell across the two fleets was louder than any explosion. In the station's control core, the air was thick with light. Myron was giggling now, watching the colors dance around her. It is working, Valen breathed, watching his console. The network is propagating the signal. It is hitting the relays in the core worlds. It is hitting the rim. Everyone is seeing it. Jonah did not have time to celebrate. The blast doors behind him hissed. A plasma cutter was burning through the lock mechanism. Sparks showered onto the deck. They know, Jonah said grimly. Harker knows he is exposed. He is not here to capture them anymore. Lyra looked up from Myron, her eyes terrified. He is here to kill us, she realized, to silence the source. Jonah racked the slide of his rifle. Keep the signal running, he ordered. Do not let Myron let go. The doors blew inward with a deafening crash. Smoke billowed into the chamber. Through the haze, armored figures charged. These were not standard troopers. They were Chimera, Harker's personal kill squad, and leading them, wearing heavy combat armor with a general's stars painted on the chest plate, was Harker himself. "Kill them all!" Harker screamed, his voice distorted by his helmet speakers. Jonah opened fire. The battle was chaotic and brutal. Jonah moved like a blur, sliding behind a crystalline pillar, firing controlled bursts that took the lead troopers in the gaps of their armor. He was not fighting with anger. He was fighting with the cold, mathematical precision of a man protecting his world. A trooper flanked him, raising a heavy repeater. Jonah spun, drawing his sidearm, putting 2 shots into the trooper's visor before the man could pull the trigger. "Lyra!" Jonah shouted. Lyra stood up. She did not have a gun. She raised her hands, palms facing the attackers. She wove the light. Using the ambient energy of the active gate, she twisted the gravity in the room. The air rippled. 3 Chimera troopers charging across the open floor suddenly slammed into the ceiling as gravity inverted in a localized pocket. They hung there, flailing, easy targets for the Vailari loyalists who were pouring fire from the upper gantries. Harker ignored his men. He charged straight for the pedestal. He had a vibro blade in one hand and a heavy pistol in the other. He was a bull, maddened by the collapse of his empire. Jonah threw his empty rifle at Harker's head and tackled him. The 2 men crashed into the base of a crystal arch. The impact knocked the wind out of Jonah, but he rolled, coming up with his combat knife in a reverse grip. Harker scrambled up. He tore his helmet off, revealing a face twisted by pure, unadulterated hate. "You traitorous piece of filth," Harker roared. "Do you have any idea what you have done? You have ruined everything. I saved everything," Jonah shouted back. Harker lunged. The vibro blade hummed, a blur of lethal motion. Jonah parried, sparks flying as steel met energy field. He ducked under a slash that would have taken his head off, driving his shoulder into Harker's midsection. They grappled, slamming against the console. Harker was stronger, fueled by rage, but Jonah was faster. "The galaxy does not care about truth," Harker spat, driving his knee into Jonah's ribs. "They will forget this in a week. They need strong men to make the hard choices. I was building a future. You were building a graveyard." Jonah gritted out. He caught Harker's wrist. He twisted. There was a snap of bone. Harker howled, dropping the blade. Jonah swept his leg, sending the general crashing to the deck. Jonah was on him in a second. He pinned Harker's good arm with his knee. He raised his knife, the point hovering inches from Harker's throat. "Do it!" Harker screamed, staring up at him with wild eyes. "Finish it, Sergeant. Prove you are a killer. Come home to the mud." Jonah's hand trembled. Every instinct in his body screamed to drive the blade down. To end the man who had tricked him into murder. To avenge the peace delegation. To avenge the 10 years of nightmares. He looked at Harker's neck. He imagined the blood. Then he heard Myron's voice. "Jonah?" He looked up. Myron was watching him from the pedestal, her hands still on the interface. She looked scared. Jonah froze. If he killed Harker now, in front of her, in front of Lyra, he would just be another monster. He would be the weapon Harker had made him. Jonah took a breath. He let it out slowly. No, Jonah said softly. He flipped the knife and drove it into the deck plate, inches from Harker's ear. I am not your soldier, Jonah said. And I am not coming home. He punched Harker in the jaw, a short, efficient hook. Harker's eyes rolled back, and he went limp. Jonah stood up, breathing hard. He looked at his hands. They were bruised, but they were clean of fresh blood. Suddenly, a massive holographic projection shimmered into existence in the center of the room. It was projected from the Vailari fleet outside. It was Lyra's uncle, Lord Vail Kor. He looked deranged, his ceremonial robes disheveled. You foolish girl, the hologram boomed, the voice echoing through the chamber. You think this changes anything? You have aired our dirty laundry to the stars. You have shamed our bloodline. Lyra stepped away from the pedestal. She left Myron's hand on the interface, ensuring the connection remained. She walked into the center of the room, facing the towering image of her uncle. She looked small against the projection. But as she raised her head, her bioluminescence flared with a regal golden intensity that outshone the hologram. I have not shamed our bloodline. Uncle, Lyra said. Her voice was amplified by the gate, broadcast to every ship in the system. I have cleansed it. You are a traitor, Velkor screamed. I am the throne. You are a parasite, Lyra countered, her voice ice-cold. You sold our children for credits. You sold our future for a crown made of ash. She looked directly into the pickup sensor. I am Lyra Vailceris. I am the daughter of the matriarch you murdered, and I declare your reign ended. She turned to the viewports, addressing the fleets directly. Soldiers of Vylar, soldiers of Terra, look at your orders. Look at who is giving them. Do you want to die for their bank accounts, or do you want to go home? There was a long, agonizing pause. Outside, the Void's hammer was powering its main cannons, targeting the station. Fire! The uncle's voice screamed over the comms. Fire, you cowards! But the cannons did not fire. Instead, the running lights on the Vailari flagship turned from combat red to neutral blue. This is Commander Talair of the Void's hammer, a new voice crackled over the open channel. We are standing down. We have seen the logs. Lord Vail Kor has been relieved of command. On the Terran side, the Aegis broke formation. This is Captain Miller, the Terran voice said, sounding shaken. General Harker is not responding. We are receiving ceasefire orders from Earth Command. The Senate has convened an emergency session. We are standing down. Jonah slumped against a pillar. He felt his knees give way. It was over. The gunfire had stopped. The shouting had stopped. Mirren took her hand off the interface. The blinding light faded, leaving the room bathed in a soft, warm glow. She ran to Jonah. He caught her, lifting her up, burying his face in her small shoulder. She smelled of ozone and cheap candy. We did it, Jonah whispered. We turned on the lights. The aftermath was a blur. Vesper dynamics collapsed within 48 hours. The stock plummeted to zero as the leaks continued to spread. Executives were arrested in their orbital villas. General Harker was taken into custody by his own military police, dragged off the station in binders, ranting about ingratitude. The station itself became a pilgrimage site. News crews from a dozen systems arrived, their drones buzzing around the crystalline gate. They called Myron the Key. They broadcast images of her holding her spinning toy, standing between a battered human soldier and a Vailari princess. Peace was not signed with a pen. It was forged in the collective outrage of two species who realized they had been played. 3 days later, in a quiet docking bay on the station's lower level, Jonah Cole was packing his rucksack. He folded his few shirts. He checked the action on his pistol, then unloaded it and placed it at the bottom of the bag. He would not need it where he was going. He did not know where he was going. Just away. He threw the bag over his shoulder and turned to the airlock. Going somewhere? Jonah froze. He turned around. Lyra was standing there. She was not wearing rags anymore. She wore a simple, elegant gown of Violari silk, shimmering with light. She looked like the princess she was born to be. "I thought I would beat the traffic," Jonah said, trying to keep his voice light. Lyra walked toward him. The click of her boots on the deck was the only sound in the bay. "The council has offered me the regency," she said. "They want me to lead the transition government." "That is good," Jonah said. "You will be great. You are tough. You are smart. And Myron," Lyra continued. "They want to study her. Gently, of course. But they say she is the future of the Gate Network." Jonah nodded. He felt a lump in his throat the size of a fist. "She is a special kid. Keep her safe." "Lyra, I intend to," Lyra said. She stopped a few feet from him. Her violet eyes searched his face. "So that is it? You just leave? You go back to stacking shelves?" "I go back to being a ghost," Jonah said. "Lyra, look at you. You are a queen. I am the guy who pulled the trigger on your family." "We went over this," Lyra said, stepping closer. "No, we didn't," Jonah said. "We survived it. That is different. Now that the adrenaline is gone, you are going to look at me and remember, every time you see me, you will see the explosion." Lyra reached out. She placed her hand on his chest, right over his heart. "I look at you and I see the man who followed me into an alley because I was hungry," she said softly. "I see the man who held my daughter while the world was ending." She looked up at him, her eyes fierce. "I am not rebuilding my world with perfect people, Jonah. I am rebuilding it with real ones. I do not want a symbol. I want the stubborn idiot human who bought me expired pie." Jonah stared at her. He wanted to believe her. He wanted it so bad it terrified him. "I am broken. Lyra," he whispered. "So am I," she countered. She took his hand and placed it on her waist. "We are all broken, Jonah. That is how the light gets in." Myron ran into the docking bay then. She skidded to a halt, seeing Jonah with his bag. "Jonah," she yelled. "Are we going?" Jonah looked at the child. Then he looked at Lyra. Lyra took his other hand and placed it on Myron's head. "Family is not about blood, Jonah," Lyra said. "And it is not about politics. It is about who you bleed for, who you live for." She stepped in close, her body pressing against his. "Do not you dare run away from this. Do not you dare run away from us." Jonah dropped the bag. It hit the floor with a heavy thud. He wrapped his arms around her. He buried his face in her hair. "I am scared," he admitted. "Good," Lyra whispered. "Be scared with me." She pulled his head down. The kiss was not like the one in the storm. It wasn't desperate. It was slow. It was deep. It was full of exhausted relief and a raw, enduring gratitude. It was a promise. They stood there in the soft starlight of the docking bay, holding on to each other while ships drifted past the viewport, Terran cruisers flying alongside Velari frigates, carrying diplomats instead of warheads. The observation deck was quiet. The only sound was the low harmonic hum of the active gate outside. Jonah stood at the window, Myron sitting on his shoulders. Lyra stood beside him, her arm linked through his. Below them, the gate shimmered against the backdrop of the gas giant. It was no longer a weapon. It was a door. Ships were queuing up, passing through the ring, jumping across the galaxy in the blink of an eye. "Are we going to go through?" Myron asked, drumming her heels against Jonah's chest. "Someday," Jonah said. "Will they have pie on the other side?" Myron asked. Lyra laughed. It was a free, light sound. "I am sure they will," Lyra said. "But let us make sure it is fresh this time." Jonah looked at the reflection in the glass. He saw a former soldier with a scar on his chin. He saw an alien queen with light in her skin. He saw a hybrid child with the universe in her genes. It was a strange picture. It did not fit any manual he had ever read. It broke every regulation in the book. He smiled. "We are going to be okay, aren't we?" Jonah asked. Lyra leaned her head on his shoulder. "We are going to be loud," she said. "We are going to be messy. And we are going to be complicated." She squeezed his arm. "But yes, we are going to be okay." Jonah watched the ships jump through the gate, disappearing into a future that was unwritten. For the first time in 10 years, he did not look back. He just held his family tight and watched the stars turn on.